Uh, our event is about climate policies, anticipating climate policies of 2050. And we have an eminent set of panelists who have joined us today. Let me first introduce to you Dr. Wendy Schutz. Dr. Schultz has been wandering the world engaged in futures research and participatory foresight for over 40 years. She has designed futures research projects for NGOs, government agencies, businesses, and recently completed with her colleagues at SAMI Consulting 4 global scenarios and multiple regional scenarios on the futures of research and innovation in the post-COVID world, something that we'll be interested in hearing today. Wendy specializes in participatory futures workshops, most recently conducted one online for the International Labour Organization, the ILO, and the International Institute of Islamic Thought. Other examples include face-to-face workshops offering foresight training in Kuala Lumpur and Istanbul, and with the Geneva Center for Security Policy in Bangkok, New York, and Geneva. Wendy teaches future studies in the master's program in strategic foresight at the University of Houston. She's a fellow of the Geneva Center for Security Policy, a senior fellow of the Center for Post-Normal Policy and Future Study, a member of the Association of Professional Futurists, and a fellow of the World Future Study Federation. She's the director of Infinite Futures and Future Puzzle Master at Jigsaw Foresight. Wendy, welcome, and looking forward to be speaking to you on this really interesting topic today.
I'm so happy to be here. What a pleasure.
Thank you. And then we have joining us from Tokyo, Dr. Naoko Ishii, who's a professor and executive vice president at the University of Tokyo, where she's also the inaugural director for the Center for Global Commons, whose mission is to catalyze systems change so that humans can achieve sustainable development within planetary boundaries. She believes academia can and should play an active role in mobilizing movements towards shared goals of nurturing stewardship of the global commons. Before joining the university, Dr. Ishii was CEO and chairperson of the Global Environment Facility, GEF, from 2012 to 2020. She formed GEF's first midterm strategy, GEF 2020, focusing on transforming of key economic systems. Dr. Ishii entered Japan's Ministry of Finance in 1981 and served as Deputy Vice Minister of Finance from 2010 to 2012. She holds a BA in Economics and a PhD in International Development, both from the University of Tokyo. Dr. Ishii, welcome to this panel discussion. So glad to have you over here.
Thank you.
Then we have Professor Rajen Pratap Gupta, who's a leading public policy expert who has been contributing to policy making for over a decade. He has authored policies across sectors, including environment. He's the former advisor to the Health Minister of India and played an important role in drafting the National Education and National Health Policy, both of which have been recently promulgated in India. He has been involved in global policy formulation at the WHO as a member of the Guidelines Development Group and is a member of the World Economic Forum's Expert Network. Dr. Gupta has authored 5 books and is widely traveled and chairs the World Intellectual Foundation. Dr. Gupta, so nice to have you over here. Welcome. And then last but not the least, we have Mr. Ishan Chaturvedi. Ishan is the director of Envipol, an environmental consulting firm working in the areas of sustainable development, climate change, and biodiversity based in New Delhi. Ishan is also the co-director of the Global Policy, Diplomacy, and Sustainability Fellowship. He serves as a faculty member as an associate professor at the Jindal School of Environmental Studies and is a leading author of various articles and policy analysis pieces on the issues of climate change, sustainability, and biodiversity. He holds a graduate degree in law, an LLM from Stanford University. So Ishan, it's your event, but since I'm the moderator, I'm going to welcome you over here.
Thank you so much.
All right, so now jumping into the topic, what are we talking about over here? So let me quote a few lines from a very famous author that I'll tell you about later. It is 2050. beyond the emissions reduction registered in 2015, no further efforts were made to control emissions. It's 2050. We are heading for a world that will be more than 3 degrees warmer by 2100. The first thing that hits you is the air. In many places across the world, the air is hot, heavy, and depending on the day, clogged with particulate pollution. Your eyes often water. Your cough never seems to disappear. You can no longer simply walk out of your front door and breathe fresh air. Instead, before opening doors or windows in the morning, you check your phone to see what the air quality will be. Everything might look fine, sunny and clear, but you know better. When storms and heat waves overlap and cluster, the air pollution and intensified surface ozone levels can make it dangerous to go outside without a specifically designed face mask, which only some can afford. These lines are adapted from a book called The Future We Choose, Surviving the Climate Crisis, written by Christina Figueres and Tom Rivett-Carnac, two leading futurists. If these lines seem like the world we are headed towards, or if you think we can avert the next climate catastrophe, or if you're curious on what policy decisions we should make in order to mitigate adverse effects of climate change in the future, today is the time when we are going to be discussing about how the world will look like from a climate change perspective in 2050 and what we can do today. So let me invite our speakers for an opening remark, starting with Dr. Wendy Schutz. And my first question over there would be that, what, in your opinion, are the actions we should take today in order to avoid a failure in keeping temperatures below 2 degrees compared to the pre-industrial level? And in general, what sort of a world we can expect to live in 2050, given our current path of efforts and the expected line of capacity building towards climate change. So Wendy, looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, it's both an honor and a pleasure to be invited to participate in this particular panel, important and timely. I'm going to specifically in these opening remarks focus on that current path, efforts, potential future in 2050, and then I think afterwards we will be addressing some of the questions about actions we can or cannot take. So let me pause for a moment to share my screen, get started. So one of the things that to me is fascinating about this is the fact that it feels like throughout my professional life, climate change has been the climate crisis, actually, to give it a more apt name, has been the issue that has been the context, essentially. And I first started as a graduate student in 1979 at the Hawaii Research Center for Future Studies. Now, what I'm going to talk about a little bit is the path of our stumbling to 2050 and the 2050 it results in. I'll try and keep it very brief. You'll note I have a timeline up here. This is not a complete timeline, obviously, of either advancements in climate research or events in climate policy development, but it's kind of indicative, and one of the things that's important when we're building scenarios and stories about alternative futures is to create a plausible narrative forward into the future about how we got there. And there are a couple of points I want to highlight. So in 1985, a consensus was declared among experts that, wow, global warming seems to be inevitable. And in 1988, of course, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was established. Now, here are a couple of little cultural events that I want to highlight, because 1989 was kind of an important year for me in my research. First of all, a journal that sadly is no longer with us called the Pacific Islands Monthly that really addressed the reading audience in the Pacific Basin region, including the smaller Pacific Island states, was published with an article on climate change with the front page that you see here, the greenhouse effect. Say goodbye to Kiribati, the Marshall Islands, Tokelau, Tuvalu, and the Great Barrier Reef in 1989. In 1989, we were also in the research center I was working on. We're working with a number of the Pacific Island nations, and in particular, the Marshall Islands, looking at sea level rise and their potential ability to adapt, because at that point they recognized that they were going to have no power to change climate change. They were too small. All they could do was raise a flag of awareness. What was also interesting in 1989 is James Burke, a noted science author and popularist, famous for a series called Connections about technological innovation and how amazingly diverse and random it is in many ways, did a special 2-hour special called After the Warming that is a brilliant systems analysis and systems forecast of what the impacts of global warming would be in 1989. That was 30 years ago. So in 95, we have the second IPCC report detecting a signature of greenhouse effect warming, raising the alert that serious warming is likely, and talking about the breaking up of the Antarctic ice shelves, and reports that that was actually beginning to occur sort of started hitting public consciousness and public opinion. In 2001, the third IPCC report basically said, yes, global warming is going to be, it has been unprecedented since the end of the last ice age, is likely. Possible severe surprises. So this notion of tipping points, of rapid and unexpected and emergent impacts is beginning to be part of what is discussed. And seriously, the scientific community, drew the line and said, this is happening. So the other point I want to highlight is climate scientists in 2008 basically said, even if we did manage to stop greenhouse gas emissions, the system is in motion. The change is in motion. Global warming will be with us to some extent. The collapse of the ice sheet in 2015 was noted to be potentially irreversible, which would cause meters of sea level rise over future centuries. And some of those ice sheets might cause significant sea level rise in very short periods of time. So 2018, we've got to stop greenhouse gas emissions. We this is all familiar. So to now, the working group, the second working group published the 6th assessment report, and it basically is telling us what 2050 is going to be like if we continue on this path. And there seems to be a lot of inertia in our political and economic systems and in our framing of the discussion, quite frankly, in many ways. So coral reefs, we could lose 70 to 90% of the coral reefs. That would also impact a lot of marine species which spawn there. We could lose freshwater fish. Ecosystems are going to be degraded, possibly beyond their ability to adapt. And of course, what we're seeing right now, increased fire seasons, increased drought, increased mudslide and floods, significant impacts on the Arctic tundra. And of course, what all this does, what all these stresses do, is they tend to stress marginalized populations in the world more than anyone else, despite the fact that those are not the populations that are causing most of this. So inevitably, famine will occur, hunger will go up, more people will be undernourished, the food chain will be more vulnerable, both marine fisheries, domesticated fishing, wild fish populations will drop. The likelihood of infectious diseases and pandemics will undoubtedly increase and may be made more severe by the fact that heat stress tends to affect the human immune system. So we're heading into a 2050 that could look really quite alarming. Water stress, more and more people, there are already populations all around the world that are suffering from water stress. That will get even worse. The ability to do work outside, the ability to even sit outside safely under conditions of very high heat and very high humidity will be dramatically dangerous. So one of the other things that happened in 2020, because I'm interested in how people think about the future and images of the future and what images of the future are out there among the population. And Kim Stanley Robinson, a noted science fiction author, wrote a book called The Ministry for the Future that was published in 2020 about the very question you're raising in this panel. How do we effectively get embedded political and economic systems, especially the economic system, the global capitalist system, how do we get it more or less to turn on a dime and change the rules of play, change underlying energy structures that are running everything else and what we think of as modern life? How do we do that? And one of the interesting things is he kicks off the Ministry for the Future with a massive heat death catastrophe in India. So this is where we are on the path, and we're not even halfway to 2050. And if you just look at the news this morning, massive, significant heat anomalies in Northern Europe, in Russia, in the Arctic, in the United States, both the East Coast and the Pacific Northwest. So this is the path we're on. And as one person in Seattle, apparently a highway engineer with a sense of humor, it's 1,000 degrees out. Where the F are you even going? Where are we even going, right? So if you continue along that path, you end up in a 2050 where we have significantly damaged ecological balances. We have potentially accelerated what is already a fairly high rate of extinction of species. There's a group called Year Zero that basically ran mathematical forecasts of when most of the, I think it was non-domesticated terrestrial mammals would be extinct. And I want you to pause for a second and think, well, what might be the outcome of a straight line mathematical forecast of the current trends of extinction of land-based mammals? And I don't know what number you have in your head, but the number that they worked out was 2026. That's 5 years from now. Now, that's a straight line mathematical forecast. Those are almost never completely accurate because other things intervene. We are in complex systems. Many things happen. But the fact that that's even possible really underscores the fact that we are damaging our ecosystems. Because of that, we are running the risk of any number of kinds of stresses. We will be producing in the next 5 or 10 years conditions that will put more and more people on the move, desperate to find someplace, not just to make a better life for themselves, to make any life at all, to survive. So there will be huge upticks in migration and environmental refugees, potentially large upticks again in starvation, in people potentially dying of thirst from lack of potable water, increased in diseases. This is a dark future if you follow the path, just looking at the changes we're making. So why am I not terminally depressed? Because there are also more at the individual and local and granular level, very positive and even inspirational actions that people together are taking in local communities to attempt pilot projects of new ways of living and adapting both in a changed environment and trying out, again, new rules of play for the economy, for energy production, for food production and the food chain. And a group has created a database called Seeds of a Good Anthropocene that basically is connecting these stories. And the great thing about them is that because these are complex systems and adaptive systems, and because they are experiencing the kind of change that is turbulent and therefore magnifies uncertainty, it's probably unlikely that one single overarching policy is going to get us to a more positive 2050. But the fact that all of these very alarming, if not catastrophic, trends that are taking us to a 2050 that could be quite dark are also being countered by people working together and working together in a local context that they really understand and comparing notes globally. So local work generating insights, comparing notes, networking, collaborating across boundaries, across philosophical, political, and economic boundaries to actually create change. So 2050, if I had to sum it up, is going to be, in many dimensions, catastrophic, and for many people. I anticipate that there will be a fair amount of loss of life on the road that we are stumbling down to 2050. But at the same time, there are going to be an enormous number of innovations, insights, kindnesses, collaboration, and a fair amount of community building. Because one thing that is absolutely true of humanity as a whole is that we are incredibly adaptive and creative. And we do, when push comes to shove in emergencies, work together. So I'm going to stop there because I bow to the expertise of the other people on the panel who I'm sure will have much more specific insights to give you about what 2050 might look like.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and thank you for giving us the broad picture on the paths that we are headed. Indeed, except for the positive note on which you ended it on, it looks like a dark, scary path that we are headed on. And I know if I could bring in Professor Rajen Pratap Gupta to give his opening statements and talk to us about how you think the world would be in 2050, we'll be delighted to hear your views, sir.
Thank you, Arpit, and I thank NV Poll for the wonderful informative webinar, and Ishan for the pioneering initiative, and also for giving me this opportunity. I'm a policy maker, so I look at policies from an intergenerational, I'll say perspective. So for me, definitely 2050 is important, but when I look at where are we headed in next century, because environment is something that perpetually keeps hitting us. I think Wendy made a very interesting presentation, and after seeing that, I changed what I wanted to say. So I'm going to look at three perspectives. One is the population, second is consumerism, and the third is technical advancement. And let's look at what we will be as a population at the end of this century. It will be around 11 billion. And if you look at what is the planet's carrying capacity, we certainly need, as I think Wendy made it very clear, I think Ishan also highlighted, clean air, water, clean energy. We will need more infrastructure, given the population that we will be headed into at 11 billion. We need more food, but the planet is not going to grow. That's a hard fact. Planet doesn't grow. So what is the planet's carrying capacity we need to figure? So there are three data sets that you prominently see. Out of that, 1.9 billion is what the multilateral bodies have said. Then you have 8 billion. Then you have 1,024 billion too, which is wild, I guess. Can never get something that planet Earth can sustain. But if it is 1.9 billion, you can look at what population is happening, what is going on. So effectively, in the 22nd century, we should be having a population that we had in 19th century, which is around 1 billion. So, and look at the growth. We grow 1 billion every 13 years. And if you look at the way we have doubled, we were doubling in 300 years, then 127 years down to 47. Imagine if in 48 years we double from 8 billion. I think Wendy has said, I think given us a very complete perspective. And look at the other side. When we say this planet doubles, let's go to some numbers, what it means. So typically, we look at the amount of land we have, 3.5 billion acres. 1.9 hectares of land is what a person needs to grow food, textiles, wood, absorbing waste. And if you look at the average land American has at their disposal, it's 9.7 acres, which means by that standard, we can support only 1.5 billion population. So the first dimension you see in getting where environment is taking us is population. Anything we see, we have to see in that perspective. And the second thing that I always look at is consumerism. World, instead of being, I don't know what we should say, we should have probably called world as a family, but we made world as a market. We are totally driven by market forces. And the way we are consuming earth resources, it 1.6 times than the sustainability rate. There is a very interesting perspective that I keep sharing when I talk about environment. It's called the Earth Overshoot Day. Now, Earth Overshoot Day is a very interesting perspective. It is what marks the date when the human demand for ecological resources and services in a given year exceeds what Earth can regenerate in that year. Last year when I spoke at the Royal Academy Symposium, I was chair of the symposium. It was August 22. This year is July 29. I have looked at all the historical dates since 1970 when the data is available. It used to be December 30. That means in 70, our regenerable resources last year were full year, less one day. In 2000, it became September 22. That means effectively for every decade we pass through, it moves 1 month before. I guess in 2050, by April, we would have consumed the entire resources meant for a year. And if we look at the end of the century, when we start the new year, we would have done with it. Now, the second thing that comes to it is consumerism. Now, I think that is where the sustainable consumption comes into picture. And if you look at environment, that is something that we should focus on. And the third one, I think all of us are connected. I see people from almost every part of the world, and technology is making this happen. Now, the third one is the technological advancement. Thanks to advancement of technology, we can connect seamlessly, and talk to each other, learn from each other. But look at what this impact would be. So if we consider that, for every web search people do, 0.7 gram of carbon emissions are added. If you did from an efficient laptop, if you did from a power hungry laptop, it is 4.5 gram. For every email, we add 4 grams to carbon emission. If it is loaded with attachment, it's 50 grams. And 78% of the email are junk. Just imagine this. And we are adding 20 million tons of carbon emissions every year. Depends on which grid you are. You must be spending between 60 gram to 1060 gram per unit of electricity. And for 1 hour mobile, if you use, you add 1250 kilos of carbon emissions. And if you go a little further, 1 minute of mobile chatter results in 50 grams of carbon emissions. So just look at, when 2050, when we get in, what would happen. In just for this webinar for 1.5 hours, each 1.5 hours with a power efficient laptop is going to add 18 grams of carbon emission. So technological advancement for me is important. At the same time, we have to be very careful about what the carbon footprint of our activity is. So what I see is a big shift happening. What you said is transport adding to pollution, industries adding to pollution. It will be our digital interactions also adding to pollution. And it will be e-waste, which will be something that we got to address, whether we call it 2050 or we call it 2020. I think Wendy's presentation was fantastic in terms of we are already into that area, where we should be talking about, the change that we need. And if you look at what this data tells us, clear pointers are emerging. One is that we are living and consuming way beyond sustainable threshold already. We've already passed that. The world is transitioning, and I think transitioning very fast in 21st century. In digitized world, gadgets will be more in terms of waste production, in terms of technology to the environment. So we need to factor that. I think it's not just the overgrowing population. It is a market-based approach and consumerism which is adding fuel to fire. Something we'll have to plan and address. When I looked at last year, when I was chairing that symposium, when I looked at the data, we only have a decade. Now I think a year less, because last year we had decade to turn the needle back in time. So with 9 years left for us to do, I think all of us have to take actionables for now to see what we can do. And I think Ishan and NVPol is doing a phenomenal work in this area. I think those who are joining will understand that it's really gone to a serious issue. 2050 is far off. I don't know how many of us would be on the screen to talk about it then. Let's not behave like a irresponsible generation. But as Wendy said, there is a ray of light. We know that human species is resilient. We have seen in COVID how the world came together, and they bought out the vaccine, and things are getting to normal for at least the rich, I would say, not so much for the LMIC countries. But I think there is a ray of hope when we all get together we should be able to turn the needle back in time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rajen. And I think the 3 points that you have skillfully argued are population, the markets, and technology. And perhaps as we proceed into the discussion, we should talk about this trend that you pointed out, that I can probably sum it up as the privatization of public goods overall. Like, if any one of us is using an air purifier at home, that's essentially privatization of a public good or an erstwhile public good, right? And how do we tackle with these trends is probably one of the biggest questions, at least for me over here. But with this, let me also invite Dr. Naoko Ishii. And Dr. Ishii, again, just want your initial thoughts on how you think that the world would look like in 2050, and what are some of the things that we can do right now?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. It all depends on our ability to collectively change the current economic system. So in that sense, it all in our hands, what kind of world we will have in 2050. Because that the issue is really our relationship, humanity's relationship with planetary system or Earth planet system. I may just want to share with you 2 slides. I'm quite inspired by Wendy's slides, so I was decided to just share with you actually the 2 slides. Let me try that if I can do it. Yeah, and I promise I can only focus on two of them. Can you see anything?
Yeah, Dr.
Good. Okay, so that when we think about that our relationship with the planetary Earth, that it may be useful for us to take back a little bit and beyond even last 12,000 the years, when that since that we Homo sapiens pop up in the world or in the globe, that the Homo sapiens went through the very difficult times, then through several glaciers and glacial period. But if you just look at the last 12,000 years, which is circled in green, we do have a miraculously comfortable, very lucky period of 12,000. And we call it the Holocene, and that is the time the geologists, the era of the temperature that move up and down only ±0, and how stable it is. And that is the only time that we Homo sapiens started to have actually civilization, because that stable, that temperature, we started to do that agriculture. We started to live in cities. We can do that in the division of labor. We somehow found that fossil fuel energy, and we actually accelerate our growth. And as two speakers already mentioned, that for the last 70 years, or maybe since last century, mid of last century, our modern economy really accelerated, but with a lot of environmental cost. So I did also want to share with one more slide, and I promise this is the last slide. When the scientists see that our relationship with the planetary Earth has started to change, they actually look into this relationship. And this is a very famous literature. Many of you may have already seen it, and read by Johan Rockström and his colleague of the planetary planet system scientists. They try to see maybe we humans have started to change our relationship with the planetary Earth system, and maybe that we have already started to destroy that our real foundation of the prosperity. You may see that on the first slide, we see that this very stable Earth system, which gives us a civilization, but then how far we can go like we are doing. So they have identified 9 kind of important planetary function and system, and then they try to measure where we are in terms of their own capacity or limitation of the capacity or the tipping points, and they measure where we are now, and they just marked with color that then So if that the color shows that it's green, we are still okay against the capacity of the planetary system. If the color looks at the yellow, we already enter into that very uncertain the area. If that the color changed to red, we were definitely already transgressed.
Dr. Ishii, just sorry to interrupt you over there. Is there a way we could put this on full screen, this particular slide, for the benefit of the audience?
Yeah, let's see that I'm not necessarily too good at it, but does it look better?
Oh yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
Yes.
So now it helped maybe you to see that what are the 9 systems, and in terms of climate change, that it's already in yellow because we are in uncertain that area. But interestingly, that the big red is biodiversity loss. Definitely, we have already transgressed the point of no return. And another interesting point is that another big red is actually chemical cycle. So these are this shows that where we are in terms of planetary capacity, and we were definitely losing that stable and resilient Earth system, which show us this the very stable and very comfortable, very favorable condition for our civilization. So the question is, if we don't, if we continue that the economic system as we have now, what will happen to our relationship with us and us? Definitely, we continue to go into this from yellow to red, and we do have a catastrophic the symptoms, as already explained and by the moderator. So the only way out and try to go back to the stabilize that the Earth system is to change the way of our life, that particularly the economic system, how we can change that our energy system, how we can decarbonize our economic activities, how we can change the way we live in cities, how we can change the way we produce and eat our food, and how we can change our production and consumption, as explained by the professor just before me, so that unless we find a way to collectively change those economic systems, we continue to go for this from yellow to red, and we destroy our own the basis of the existence. So what is really challenged is, do we have an capacity to collectively change those key economic systems which are so embedded to our day-to-day life? So even if we do understand the science, what can we really do to change this big system, and which is a part of our life? Wendy gave us a very interesting the example of how the individual or the local community have already started to change. And I do fully understand that. The question is, those are the local initiative, local way of managing local commons can be actually extended to manage the global commons. I was introduced as inaugurating director of the Center for Global Commons. Why I named the center the Global Commons? Because global commons definitely requires a new way of governing it. It's not just a by the initiative, unfortunately. Some can be taken care of that, but it's definitely falls short. It falls short of that. So can we collectively find this new way of governing those global commons? That's going to be today's topic, I guess. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ishii. So things that I'm hearing in terms of, certain solutions, obviously all of the speakers until now have successfully been able to communicate a horrid picture of the future, and you've been successfully been able to scare us. But then the things that I'm hearing, Wendy talked about greater local level changes, networkings, and just those communities and nodes of people. Then Rajen talked about the use of technology, of changing how we conceptualize our activities. I would just not call it economy, but then everything that we do in terms of the markets. And then again, Naoko is talking about how do we think about production and consumption and how do we build coalitions to rethink some of these things. So, there's some bit of a pattern that's emerging that, okay, these are probably the things that we should do. But before I get into that, I would like to come to Ishan to pose the same question. Where do you see the world in 2050, and what are some of the things we should be looking at right now? But even before Ishan starts, just for the people who are watching us live on LinkedIn, if you had a registration link and you were not able to join the event on Zoom, we have fixed that glitch right now. And now if you try again logging on through the Zoom link that must have been shared with you after you'd registered, you would be able to enter the room over here. So Ishan, over to you.
Thank you, Advait. It's a bit of a responsibility to be following the speakers that I'm following in this panel. It is an advantage given the fact that they've already covered a major chunk of substantive points. I know a lot needs to be done about it, but those are the ideation points. It's a disadvantage because whatever you do, you cannot stand on the same pedestal as they do. So with that knowledge in my mind and awareness, and because Advait has already talked about how a grim picture has been painted, and I think the occasion is such that it is grim. I would first start with something that Advait had quoted Christina Figueres earlier. I'd refer to her book, and in her book she refers to optimism. And let me first change the dialogue here and try to change the dialogue here, even though I will be getting into pessimism myself.
Thanks, Ishan. We needed an optimist. Please stick to that. Yes.
So no pressure. So remember, when it comes to human crises, when it comes to anthropological crises around the globe, short-term, mid-term, long-term, small-scale, large-scale, optimism is not a point of view. For policymakers such as Dr. Gupta, they know that optimism is a strategy. So if you have to strategize about dealing with a particular crisis, optimism is the first thing you establish. What happens when you lose the optimism? You end up in the grim picture that everyone has painted 30 years later from now. So first thing that we need to do is be optimistic about it and know that if enough is done. See, the good thing about climate change is that and the bad thing about climate change is that you do not have anyone else to blame. So if you yourself are making those changes, that is then optimism in action. And hence each one of us, if we have that optimism, I know that 450 people signed up for this event and many are watching on LinkedIn. If each of us are able to be optimistic and change those little things, markets and governments will mold themselves according to the will of the people. Remember, consumers, as Dr. Gupta said, without consumers, there's no market, there's no corporation, there's no government. And you are the consumers and you have to behave in a way, and we need to change our behavior in a way that the picture looks better. Mm-hmm. But again, because this whole talk is about 2050, and I'll keep it short at the time, I'm aware of the fact that we have to keep our introductory remarks short. Because this is all about time, and we'll go into the substance of all of this going forward, I just want to draw an analogy which I love to draw for my students in my classes. One of the most interesting concepts ever invented by Homo sapiens is the concept of time, right? Time, what is it? It is, according to our definition, it might be 24 hours, it might be 9:15 wherever in the world you are, it might be a bad time, good time. Time could be anything. Time has existed before us, time will exist after us. We all try to save time, we all try to run behind time and catch up on time and catch up on lost time, and that time never comes back. Now, if that is an analogy all of us can associate with, let's also associate ourselves with a similar analogy. environment has pre-existed. Environment will exist after us in whatever state we leave it in. We'll always try and conserve environment. However, it seems to be running out of our hands. We are just lagging behind. Environment, if we are on time, if we are on course with our natural resources, everything looks better, everything is well managed, we're living in a good time. And similarly, if we have to compare our impact on environment, remember that if the planetary cycle of our Earth, of our planet, was rolled across in the form of a football field, and the G-Perts fellows in the class already, in the session already know about this, if the planetary cycle, the lifetime of our planet was rolled across on a football field or a soccer field, given the fact that we're also joined by people in the Western Hemisphere, human beings have been in existence on this planet. Homo sapiens have been in existence on this planet for equivalent to 1/16 of an inch of that football field, equivalent to the width of a single blade of grass. So I think the first introductory remark that I'd like to share with all of you is that before we get into all of these substantive discussions, intellectual and academic discussions, let us look within ourselves and shed the hubris that comes from being a Homo sapien, that we have impacted so much and we can do so much and we continue doing so much. Because if you're able to disassociate yourself from something that is a lot bigger than you, and as I argue in my writings, that we're not even able to define properly the term environment, the term sustainability, then and only then will we be able to make this transition and go on to that path of possibility. So we'll get into more discussions, I'm sure, and I have a page full of points to make, but I'll hand it over to Arpit to carry the conversation forward.
No, thank you so much, Ishan. And I think what you said in your opening remarks also ties very well to what Wendy was talking about, that it's a complex adaptive system. And, this is something that we can change, and there's almost, you can have a fork in the road, or maybe you could have multiple pathways on which you can go. And what I appreciate is that you are also bringing in the element of perspectives in looking at systems. And that's the, as I say, the fourth wave of systems thinking, where it's not just about the parts of the system and the relationships between them, but it's also the distinctions and the perspectives that you bring in that impacts the system over there. But let me bring it back to, some of the things that we discussed right now. So, some of the things that, Dr. Gupta talked about, markets creating great inequalities, each action, including this call, creating a lot of carbon footprint. I'm probably going to plant a tree right after this. Then, other things that Professor Ishii has talked about, that, there are certain things on which we have already crossed the Rubicon. I also see a number of things that, that we'd be seeing, such as, a greater competition over resources. So perhaps intensification of conflict, greater inequalities, and how do we, as human beings, how have we managed inequalities? It has either been through coercion or through, some ideologies that have, kept people suppressed. So, perhaps those are also the things that we'll be seeing more and more in the future. Now, my question to the panel right now is that in terms of the immediate future, so let's say if we don't talk about 2050, where we are seeing so many catastrophic things happening, what if we think a little short term? What if we think, Professor Gupta works with governments, and governments typically, have a 5-year to 10-year thought cycle. So what are some of the, changes, or what are some of the good and bad directions in which, things are shaping up that you see in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 to 15 years? And what are some of the positive ones in terms of, positive changes, positive policies that we can expect in the next 10 to 15 years? And you can talk about, the world at large, or you could also talk about, various regions such as India. So I don't know if Professor Gupta, do you want to jump onto this first?
Yes, thank you. And I think I would say that, the best part that has happened is thanks to people like you who have brought the focus. Well, everyone thinks that, this is a major area. What difference do I make? I think you all make a big difference. As you said, even like 100 people came out of 450 registration. Even if one person plants a tree, you make a difference. So I think we don't have to wait for everyone to start together. Each person can do. So let me, get to the point that you have specifically mentioned. So what I see as the biggest thing that happened is, right from the former US Vice President to people who started attending to this issue early on, so a lot of focus was brought in, and I think the UN SDGs have talked about sustainable consumption. Though I think they should be very important, but there are a lot of things that also flow into as subsets. We always talk about the big goals. We also have to look at what are the smaller things that we can achieve. So the biggest commitment that has come is that people have joined the race to aware people. I would say we need to go beyond awareness. We need to sensitize people. Let me give you an example to understand this. Typically, if you ask a diabetic to control his sugar, it will be tough. But the moment you tell that 32% of all diabetics end up having a chronic kidney disease, you will see the sensitization happening. So I think, yes, you need to get to sensitize people. Awareness beyond a point is not going to lead to results. Let me also give you the kind of commitments people have done. So you have Government of India saying we will reduce the emission intensity of GDP by 30 to 35% by 2030. We'll increase the forest cover to 33% by 2030. And will be 100% electronic vehicle nation by 2030. So countries have committed, whether to show globally that we mean what we are saying, or whether it's exigency. But yes, there are large-scale actions. But let me tell you, the biggest challenge, if you see, is human side. We still believe, since I am not impacted, so doesn't worry. This is all like big talk, doesn't happen, doesn't impact. So the biggest challenge is acceptance of the problem. We have still not understood the magnitude of the problem, though disasters have become the fifth season in most part of the world. Look at India, how many times we have seen flooding, we have seen extreme weather. I think Wendy showed that slide. I think Ishi talked about it. So that we are always in denial mode. So we need to address from the behavioral standpoint. Governments can change system by making laws. But I believe more than laws, we need education, we need sensitization. And this means a partnership. I mean, I think people like you are best suited to drive that, a partnership between academia, civil society, and the industry. That's the kind of coalition we need. And they need to go down to city and schools level. Unless we do that, it's going to be tough. And 2050 is not something we can afford to wait for.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. And I really like the distinction that you draw between awareness and sensitization. That's something that I think we should think a lot more about. I frankly am beginning to think that this is a collective action problem. More than anything, it is about how do we model individual behavior and, make people understand that a little bit of, self-sacrifice, what it may seem, may be in their own benefit. But I can see Wendy unmuting herself, so I'm assuming that, Wendy, you have something to add to this.
Thank you. Yes, I want to amplify Dr. Gupta's remarks because I agree entirely. And one of the issues in future studies as an academic discipline actually is to try and sensitize people to change, and not just to change, but to the impacts of change. And this assumption and having people get out of the, well, yes, that change is happening, but it's happening somewhere else, which is the sort of the opposite side of the not in my backyard syndrome. It's the I don't want this in my backyard, I don't want that in my backyard, and I don't expect that to be in my backyard. I expect it to be in someone else's backyard. And the interesting thing about it is that with climate change, because it is unfolding to the human perception at this sort of geologic scale or ecosystem scale, that it's not only, well, yes, climate change is a problem, but that's happening in, other places, but it's also that's happening in other times. And I have literally heard policymakers saying, I don't really have to care about that because I'll be dead. And politicians saying, I won't be in office anymore. So it's the sensitization issue is really important, and it gets to a basic understanding and assumption of systems thinking, which is that the most powerful place to intervene in a system, as Donella Meadows would tell us, is down at the very deep levels of rules and assumptions and beliefs, the sort of cultural sets. And so you had asked beforehand, you had sent to the panel some questions. One of them was, what are some of the hardest problems to solve for effective action? And it's exactly this, changing people's core assumptions, the beliefs, the narratives, in fact, the myths, the cultural structures of myths and metaphors and language that they use to even talk about some of these issues. And coupling that with the difficulty of helping them actually see the change, because a lot of times the change, the initial signals of the change are happening somewhere else, although more and more all those changes are happening in our backyard. So this moving people out of the it can't happen in my here or my now thinking, and also encouraging folks to have a sense of responsibility and accountability for the changes we set in motion by doing simple things like buying one more piece of clothing that we don't need, but it's the new fashion, so we're doing it. And it's things that we have all done, quite frankly. It's things that we're raised to do as consumerists. So it gets back to Dr. Gupta's point about we are in a consumerist culture, and we need to fundamentally transform that. We need to fundamentally transform the economic systems that we're in. And one last thing, there are some very interesting projects and processes going on right now where consumers, often younger children, are suing companies and policymakers for endangering their futures. There are people that are looking at ways to significantly change the ethics and accountability around investing to try and actually use investing as a lever to transform the global economic system. So again, there are, despite the real challenges of this crisis, there are, as you say, points of light. And a lot of them will at some point need global, I'm not sure I can say global governance, but certainly some sort of global coordination.
Right. Thank you so much, Wendy. And, I definitely understand the idea of, hitting on the changing or the underlying rules or, the underlying mental models that are leading to these emergent properties in the system, which is, putting the whole of the humankind in crisis. But then I sometimes think that, how do you define rules which are incentive compatible on an individual level?
Okay, so Daniel Wall has been doing some really interesting work on sustainability, and in one of his essays, and I was remembering it this morning and I highlighted it, he was talking about the precautionary principle, and that we need to change this focus on we're making things for profit to think through, and let's see how he puts it. We urgently need a Hippocratic oath for design, technology, and planning. Do no harm. To make this ethical imperative operational, we need a salutogenic, health-generating, intention behind all design, technology, and planning. We need to design for humans, ecosystems, and planetary health. And that could be incentivized. And I would add, we need a variant for futures. First, do no harm. First, foreclose no futures. We are foreclosing huge numbers of possible and potentially desirable futures for especially marginalized populations all over the planet by putting them in danger.
Yeah.
And endangering more and more people by this. So.
No, certainly. I think those are some great actionables. I would want to go to Nauko and hear your views on, in the immediate terms, what are the kind of challenges that we are looking at and what could be some of the solutions? Over to you.
Well, I just want to build on what Wendy said or the discussion for the last few minutes. I mean, the issue is really, in my view, how to govern, to find a way to govern the global commons. As we already discussed, there are quite a kind of already effective way of managing or governing local commons, because there is a local community. It's a part, it's their backyard, but also there is a community that who knows that that they can benefit, they can be better off after following the common rule. But so it worked on the local commons, but commons in general subject to the tragedy of commons, so that the individual that acts and rationally, it ends up actually eating a lot of commons, and then the people would be the global commons like a climate change or rainforest and ocean, the water is really a good example of tragedy of tragedy of global commons. That's why I'm kind of insisting that it's really time for us to find a new way of managing or governing or stewarding the global commons, because why stewarding? Because it's also intergenerational injustice between the current generation and the future generation. So we are responsible to managing it, that then stewarding it, and then pass it to the future generation. So that there are two challenges here. The one, the current economic system does not value those kind of hidden costs of the friction between current economic system and then a capacity of loss, including loss of biodiversity or carbon footprint. So the one way to really manage the global commons is to put the price on those externalities. But it takes time, and it's a little difficult to imagine that they can be implemented anytime soon. So there are other ways of managing or trying to manage those global commons, like a collective action that then among policymakers and then enlighten the business leaders or citizens, those kind of multi-stakeholder coalition to try to address that a few of the challenges is another way of trying to manage those global commons. But I still see the big challenge in it. As Professor Gupta already mentioned, we the human being, let's say consumers, can exercise a big decision-making power through the decision of what to eat or what to wear. Wendy also mentioned that. So that so if that the information is given, and if that the individual action can actually address the system change, great, let's do it. But in many cases, the individual action cannot really lead to the system change. I am living in Tokyo. I have no way to choose a renewable energy for heating on my own house. This is a government energy system, which is still, the firing the coal-fired power plant, and we have no way to exercise my own decision, right? So that there are things which the current economic system still impose a lot of restriction, and this is where I think we need to find a way to really try the system change and fighting against this vested interest. And we need an international collaboration on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ishii. Over to you with the same question. And meanwhile, members in the audience can start typing out their questions. We are probably going to carry on with the first segment of this discussion for another 20 minutes, after which especially Dr. Ishii has to leave. It's really late over there in Tokyo. But Ishan, meanwhile, over to you, and while the audience can start thinking and typing their questions in the chat box.
Yes, so I think we're opening the chat box in 2 minutes, and as soon as it's open, the audience can type in their questions as well. I want to address 2 points here, and both of them are very important, and I'm again going absolutely off script, just going by the discussions that we're having. The first is a very important point of sensitization that Rajen sir raised, and then it went into how collective action is an important component of sensitization as well. And I come from, for those of you who do not know, by qualification, I'm a lawyer, so I go back to one of the legal disputes that we are so often faced with. Is that of inheritance. And again, I'm drawing an analogy here for you to help understand how we function in terms of sensitization and collective action. If you are staying somewhere and if your neighbor is having some issues with their siblings over property, over their property that they inherited from their parents or their grandparents, you do not care. right? The maximum that you care about is how will be the new heir. Whoever gets this inherited property, will he or she be a good neighbor or not? But if you are in place of that neighbor, and if you are fighting for that inheritance, what do you consider? You consider that I get the full share in this property, right? I get the property in the same state as it was left behind for me. I get the property in a way that I can utilize it as well as my parents could or grandparents could. It's the same with inheritance of natural resources. And this is very important. Are we all sensitized enough, to borrow Dr. Gupta's word, and are we all doing that in a collective way, to borrow Dr. Rishi's comment? Are we all fighting for our inheritance about natural resources from our previous generations, like we would have if it were a case of a house or a flat or a bungalow, as the case may be, or the land? So that's one. How do you solve this collective action problem in a way that you realize that you have a vested interest in that natural resource? And that vested interest could be through anthropogenic terms. So it could be in terms of monetary value for you. If that helps you conserve something, it could be for its ecosystem service value, as we call it in environmental policy. The second thing that I wanted to address is consumerism. And again, I want to give the floor to our panelists and take up the questions as well. So in the meanwhile, I'll be very short and just sum up consumerism by an 1800s poem by Alexander Pope, which I know Arpit enjoys a lot. He's one of our favorite poets generally. And he had this prose which says, "How happy is the blameless vestal's lot, the world forgetting by the world forgot, eternal sunshine of the spotless mind, each prayer answered and each wish resigned." So to tackle consumerism, you need to approach it from this beautiful prose standpoint that all of your prayers need to be about your needs, and all of your wishes, which are about your greed, can be put in the back burner. And we haven't even got into the whole discussion of circularity and integrated loops and zero waste and those sort of things. And I know that Dr. Rishi has worked extensively on this, so I would give the floor to her to talk about circularity. But the idea is consumerism, sensitization, collective action. When it comes to climate change, governance, policy, sciences, law, academics, as Dr. Gupta said, all of these are just different sides of a single dice. And unless you have all of them figured out, your Rubik's Cube would never make sense to anyone. So it does not matter if you have one thing taken care of. It has to be all of those things coming together, and that's why global collective action, local collective action. So what are you doing in your local community? Are you sensitizing them enough? Do they know, or let's not even go to the local community, do we know that when we board a 7-hour flight from New York to London, one seat on that 7-hour flight is equivalent, from New York to London, is equivalent to melting 3 square meters of polar ice caps on a single trip. And if you go to the business class, it's a lot more. Do we know these things? I know that Dr. Gupta talked about how even this call will have a certain grams of carbon being put in the atmosphere. Imagine the kind of impact we're having when we are environmentally conscious, admittedly. And then think of the people who are not sensitized, who are not aware, who are not educated, whichever term you want to use. So it's a problem. It's a complex problem with layers. And that's why we need as many people as possible to talk about it, to ideate about it, sometimes to just discuss. And when it comes to environment, and I say this a lot, there are no stupid questions, there are only stupid answers. So question everything. Go to the systems thinking approach of questioning everything. And that's our only way out. Over to you, Arpit.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ishan. So to sum up, if we were creating a compendium or publishing this discussion as a book, it would probably be called How Not to F Up Our Future. And the chapters would probably be, the first one would be about culture and sensitization. The second one would be incentives and economics. The third one would be collaborations and partnerships. That's broadly the picture that we can draw if we are to take something away from this.
But knowing Dr. Gupta, I think there'll be a book out on this in the next month now. He comes out with a book in every 2-3 months.
Ishan, I'll just say there are two things that I'm working on right now which are very related, and thanks you invited me. So we're working on two things. One is a detailed note on circular economy, where we're looking at professions, we're looking at countries, we're looking at sectors. We're also working on sustainable automation, something that I brought out, that we are technically advancing, but environmentally we are degrading. So sustainable automation holds the key. So we are working on 2 papers, and I think we should be out in next 4 weeks. Yeah, exactly to your point. We've been working for the last 6 months on that.
Thank you. So I'm going to first take a question from Bhavya Singh. Bhavya is a public policy student, and her question to the panel is, do you think that in the international arena, if climate change policies are dealt under hard laws as compared to soft laws? I think Bhavya is talking about, international organizations not having the power to enforce laws. There might be a change in how countries perceive or work towards effective climate change policies, especially the developed countries, since hard laws have more legal accountability. So does anybody want to take this up in terms of international organizations having the enforcing capacity?
I think Dr. Gupta.
Dr. Gupta, yes.
And I know that Dr. Rishi has also worked on this in her role as the GEF chief. So we can go to Dr. Gupta and then Dr. Rishi.
Sure.
So, one is that, what Mao said, that, the more the number of statues, more the number of thieves and brigands. So you can create more laws, you can create more statues for people to, evade them or circumvent them. I think what you require is an intrinsic drive, which comes, I can bet you that those who have heard this discussion, few would have moved to say, I will do my bit. So I'm a policy maker. I believe that's my job to make policies, but I still believe if you sensitize people, if there is an inherent desire for them to do something, it makes. So I would focus more on education sector, where you educate people early on, work in communities, because the effort that is required is in communities. Countries are formed with communities. So I think that is more important than having hard laws to implement. I think harder laws haven't delivered, unfortunately, if you look at evaluating them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. And Dr. Ishi, over to you.
Yeah, actually, the GEF, Global Environment Facility, which I worked for 8 years as CEO until last summer, was created to help developing countries to follow or to meet the obligation under 3 environmental treaties: climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation. But we all know by now that how effective those mechanisms have been, and the climate has been worsening, the biodiversity and then being lost. So that those treaty-based international system and intergovernmental system, unfortunately, they're proven not to be effective. And maybe one good part is actually that the Paris Accord of the climate change, at least, and 95 countries agreed to step up their own efforts to achieve 2 degrees or 1.5, but still, we all know it's not really forced to make an economic and transformational change. So it actually tell us, in my view, that those treaties or laws are not really the best way to manage the climate change, because what is really needed is a comprehensive, total transformation of the economic system, which is far beyond those treaties or those accord treaties. So, and that's why we are having this discussion, what's the best way to actually realize the total system change. And that all go back to the policy issue, the education issue, the citizen-to-citizen initiative, or the community issue. And we really need to find the best way to govern those global commons and local commons. And that is what we are striving. So the question is, just in quick response, that I don't think that the enforcement strengthen that the law enforcement really doesn't give us to anywhere. But then the fundamental understanding of the science and education and the changing value, which leads to the system change, is extremely important. Being an economist and a practitioner for 40 years, I actually don't necessarily trust or feel confident of the moral-based economic system or the economic decision, that the economic decision needs to be based on the economic number. So that's why I'm kind of promoting a kind of putting the price on the natural capital, or at least starting with carbon. And while failing, that takes time, we need to find a way to the international collaboration among the multi-stakeholders to push that transformation change. Thank you.
No, indeed, I think that would be a monumental project if you were to do that, and I'm glad that you're working towards that. Similar note, we have a question from Ambassador Abbas Ahmed Abbas from Somalia, and he's saying, technically, how can low-income countries like Somalia benefit from renewable energy and can avoid burning charcoal for economic development? So I think the question over there is that, you know, a lot of times the argument is that developing countries can now afford to invest in, waste treatment plants and solar energy, et cetera. But then how do developing countries catch up in the face of this? So I know if any of our panelists can jump onto that one.
I'm happy to take that question, Arpit.
Sure,
Risha. Thank you, Ambassador, for the question, first of all. It is in 1992, when the Rio Declaration happened, in clause 7 of the Rio Declaration, there was this very interesting concept that was introduced. And may I suggest with some disdain towards some people who were on the negotiating table. And that clause talked about the CBDR principle, which stands for Common but Differentiated Responsibility Principle. Now, this was the first time where the global North and the global South came together, recognizing that there are two main issues in dealing with environment, sustainability, climate change. One is that of capacity. So as His Excellency mentioned, some nations do not have the capacity in the first place. And I'm not talking about capacity in terms of fiscal capacity only. I'm talking about human resources, natural resources, awareness programs, technology, various knowledge capital. All of these are capacities. So there was capacity with the global North. The second issue was culpability. Mm-hmm. Who has led us here? Now, we can keep on blaming the developed world and global North, and as we should to an extent, but remember that 85% of all climate impact has happened due to our pollution since the Second World War. So it's literally your generation, your dad's generation, and your grandfather's generation. So at some point of time, we need to shed this global North, global South tag. However, I completely am in agreement with the ambassador that sometimes it is important to, and that is why GCF was put in place, and a Green Climate Fund, and a lot of other institutions are being put in place, because this pipeline of resources needs to be created that levels the playing field between capacity and culpability. And there's, under environmental law, there are these principles of international environmental leakage and the beneficiary-based principle. I think Wendy referred to polluter-based principle. Beneficiary-based principle is like polluter-based principle 2.0. or pro-max, if you like, if you're a woke millennial. And beneficially based principle says that you are benefiting due to exploitation of environment that was done by the previous generations. And this is referring to the global north. And hence, because you're benefiting, and then there is Axel Gosseries and Eric Neumayer and Edmund Burke, who have basically suggested that because you have benefited, no one should be a free rider and you should pay on account of exploitation of environment by your forefathers. So there are a lot of things that are happening. I must also address the last question, because I think the power of soft law, soft negotiation, soft power dynamics cannot be discounted ever. So how many of us left usage of plastic straws after we looked at that turtle that had a plastic straw going through its nose? That's not a real law by which you had to adhere to, but there was some power dynamic that played its part. Similarly, you can take up other examples of such soft politics through which we have been able to make a difference. But I'll cut my answer short because I know that it is quite late in Japan for Dr. Rishi, and even for Dr. Gupta, I know that he is a very early riser. So Arpit, over to you.
Sure. There are at least 3 great questions. And by the way, guys, who are everyone who's posting questions, I'm not taking them in the order that I'm receiving it. I'm just picking the questions that I like. So I think one great question that I have, and this could probably be the last one over here. There are 2 more. So if we can have some panelists stay over, but I know Dr. Ishi has to go. But this question has been pointed specifically to Dr. Schutz and Dr. Ishi by Noyonika Bakchi. And Noyonika is asking that with respect to tipping points in systems thinking, and something that Dr. Ishi also showed in her slides, that we have crossed over to cross the tipping point in terms of biodiversity, etc. So her question is, once a tipping point is reached, which from what I understand is when we leave from one region and move to another, aka green to yellow, for example, is a new equilibrium state reached? And if it does, am I correct in assuming that at this point the destruction occurs faster at an accelerated rate because the system has become more fragile? So Dr. Schultz and Dr. Ishi.
Wendy, do you want to go first, or do you want me to take it?
Since it starts with a reference to your slides, I thought you should go first.
Yeah.
Okay. This is, well, if I understand that their analysis correctly, that the yellow area is a kind of uncertainty area, that the red is more like definitely we are actually crossing over the tipping points or the boundaries. And what it really means is that the Earth system is, it's a kind of, if the Earth system is one equilibrium, and if it goes to the yellow to red, it may jump onto the new equilibrium, which we are really not yet know. So that
right.
so that it incurred a huge uncertainty and huge maybe risks, because we are actually sailing into the uncharted sea. And but the scientists are saying that that new equilibrium is not really considered to be as favorable as a Holocene period, which we enjoy for that 12,000 years. And so we need to really prepare ourselves. The best we can do, according to them, is to minimize this change of this destruction, so that then if we really don't do anything, if we don't change that current course of action, we really go into this huge the pathway to the hothouse Earth, they also call it, and then that more and more destruction is kind of triggered by through the domino effect. So let's work together to arrest that change as soon as possible, and then as much as possible. That is the message I understand. Back to you.
Thank
Back to
you.
Wendy, maybe.
Okay, so for me, this opens the door for me to talk about systems dynamics more generally, which is always fun. One of the issues in future studies, when we are asking people to think about long-range futures and the potential for change and the infinite variety of futures that are possible from any given moment in the now, is that we almost immediately have to enter into the discussion of the difference between possibility and exploring possibility and evaluating possible futures for preference, right? Stress testing them against our values, in other words. So to me, we need to be careful when we're talking about systems in terms of equilibrium and stability and whether or not a new equilibrium state is reached is a different question from, and are we going to like it as humans? And the other question is, and does the planet care if we, the humans on the planet, like it? Because maybe it's going to be great for everybody else on the planet, right? So one of the issues in sensitizing is this notion of our incredible humanocentric way of looking at the world. But in terms of stability, generally, where the slide aside, the issue right now is that we've got a number of systems that were stable, reasonably stable in the Holocene that have been perturbed. And so a number of them are have been sort of jogged into turbulence or jogged into chaos, and they will eventually reach they'll hit a tipping point and they'll reach some new equilibrium point, which literally is more stable than chaos. That it's equilibrium, it's balance. So in that extent, the system won't be more fragile, and when it hits equilibrium, it will probably be changing less. But the question of whether or not we like the equilibrium it reaches and whether or not our cultures, our societies, our civilizations, for whatever worth they are able to survive the new equilibrium is sort of a different question. And one of the points that I think is true is that we want to try and avoid the tipping point if at all possible. And this gets back to some of the earlier questions. And what I was thinking about while listening to all these very insightful responses is that the problem with this is that it's a classic wicked problem.
Yeah.
There is not one thing we can do. There is not one issue that can be solved. You had asked the question again to the panelists in advance of, is there a low-hanging fruit that we could just address immediately? No, because anything, if you say, well, transport is huge and it's contributing massive amounts to carbon emissions, so maybe we should, work on transport and mobility. Well, except that you can't work on transport and mobility without working on energy. Right, so everything is interconnected. And I think, to me, one of the things that's interesting is that this requires an all scales, all levels, like all directions approach, because it is a massively, we are embedded in this dynamic, complex, adaptive system that periodically parts of are being perturbed into chaos. And so there are no easy answers. There are no straight line, I see a goal, we can take these actions, we will reach it. That's not going to be possible. But if more and more of the strong legal approaches and the soft legal approaches and different policy approaches and different community approaches and different individual approaches are all aligned roughly along the same idea of a preferred future, of a better outcome, then we can start making small shifts at multiple levels, whether really large systems or really small systems, that might actually be able, as a sort of symphony of responses, to have an impact. But there isn't going to be one easy answer to this ever. So, on the other hand, we're good.
I think I need to. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, I think that I really need to leave now, but then I just want to thank you and just just a quick response to maybe pattern is just being discussed this on anything we can do immediately. I think that I agree with Wendy saying that no, I think it's a very dangerous way of thinking about it, because everything is connected, everything is kind of systemic, and then the challenge is kind of enormous. So that rather than just thinking about that is at the short way of addressing it, I think we really have to take it very frontally and more comprehensively. The only exception I think that I can do tomorrow is, as I think that Professor Gupta said, that demand the information, or demand the change, or that what we want to eat. And when I go to the supermarket to pick up my dinner tonight, I want to have information of how much carbon or biodiversity of that particular food cost, and we can demand it. And we are not necessarily easy to get it. But then after actually that the more demand from the consumer, individual consumer, may add to the system change, at least the pressure to the system change. That's something we can start even tonight. And I actually believe in why the system change is difficult. I kind of believe in this, and individual can design it's our own solution and to do this and question. So thank you, and thank you for so much of having me. May I?
Thank you so much.
It's now 12:30 a.m. So
Oyasumi nasai.
Oyasumi nasai. Have a very early morning tomorrow. So thank you so much, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ishii, for staying in so late and for accepting the invite for the late night discussion. And I think this is also time to sum up the discussion, and especially this last segment really talks about, it reminds me of something that my game theory professor, Dr. Kaushik Basu, used to say, that if you want to transform one part of the system, if you think about it, it's really about transforming the whole system itself. So I think, with that, I would like to thank the London Climate Action Week, all of our panelists, and all of the people in the audience for asking such wonderful questions. We have another segment of our event in right after this, so do not start logging off. Hang on, and we have some great discussion yet to be done now from our Global Policy, Diplomacy, and Sustainability Fellows. But before we jump into that, first let me thank all of our panelists, Dr. Ishii once again, Professor Rajen Pratap Gupta, Dr. Wendy Schutz, and Ishan Chaturvedi. So thank you so much for the great discussion. I also have to observe that there are certain very good questions over here that we could not take up, but I'd invite you all to be in touch with us, especially questions from Lansana J. Sheriff, Sakshi, and Suchita, but Suchita is already a GPOTS fellow, so she's going to be in touch with us anyway. So thank you so much. And Professor Gupta, Professor Schutz, you guys have a great night, and thank you so much for joining us. We really, really found this discussion insightful, and I hope that How Not to F Up Our Future is a book that can be collaboratively produced.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Thank you
so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
So guys, remember, we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll come back with a second session, a session that I promise will be as lively, if not more, and as thought-provoking, if not more. Before we do, and before we have our 5-minute session break, please make sure that you fill out the survey link that we have circulated. Please remember that because it's a certificate workshop, so you need to be in attendance for both the sessions, so please do not log off. And that's about it. We'll also try and take up some of the questions that have been asked in the last session in the next session. So that being said, if we could have a short video that we could play for all of you before we head into the 5-minute break, and we'll see you in 6 minutes, 6 to 7 minutes from now. Over to you, Aditi, for the video, please. Thank you so much, Wendy.
Thank you.
this is a place where, you are not really a student. We are not really teachers. We are all coming together in a community of fellowship. And that's the reason why we call it a fellowship, where we think that everybody makes knowledge or builds knowledge based on the ideas that they already have in their mind.
The problem is greenhouse gas emissions that affect the temperature of the climate.
The agricultural land, the places which we use to grow crops, have a fair amount of saltwater intrusion.
Actually, the very close cooperation between the United States and China to come to an agreement to how to operationalize this principle into the future.
Policy-making body on environment at the same level with the General Assembly for all other issues globally. But for environment, it established the United Nations Environment Assembly.
ION term, IOI, or impact on investment. So that's essentially what this, your management really should all be about. You're trying to maximize the impact on investment.
So you might define it as coordinated and synchronized action that often deliberately targets democratic states and institutions.
Someone has said, never let a crisis go to waste. So we are in a huge crisis. Let's not, waste it, and instead build from it, build safer, better, and in a more holistic fashion.
I am thoroughly enjoying the fellowship. I think it's keeping me enthusiastic, lively. I'm really excited. I look forward to lectures. I look forward talking to Arpit and Ishan more often. So I'm really glad that I am a part of GPODs. I took the right decision.
GPODs has helped us build such a rich network of professionals who are truly global and, are actually working at the cutting edge of solving some real policy problems.
So this is one go-to course that you really need in your life so that you can really enhance in your academic skills and get to push to what you really want to achieve in life when it comes to policy making, sustainability and diplomacy.
Knowledge sharing that's happening, and it's not just learning from the mentors and the people who are taking the lectures, but it's also learning from the fellows and learning from your peers. And I think that's really amazing. And the fact that all the fellows come, like we all come from such diverse professional backgrounds, so that's really a huge plus.
So yeah, I think the amount of interactions I have had with my co-fellows and the mentors, so those have been very good. And since we have been in the lockdown since the past 1 year, so I haven't really had the chance to interact with new people and get new perspective into my life. So I think that way the fellowship has helped me a lot. I have so many friends across the globe now, and so the key learnings have been very helpful for me.
Take away from this fellowship, which is to always be a learner and to never stop being a student.
So that's about our Global Policy, Diplomacy and Sustainability Fellowship that we run as an organization. It's a 3-month online fellowship program where mentors from all over the world, such as folks who were speaking in the earlier panel discussion, people coming from such backgrounds would come in to train, to talk to, and to mentor people of the next generation. So essentially, what we are doing is, trying to do a lot of these things that we discussed in the previous section, which was to create coalitions, to build networks, to build a community, to enhance our knowledge about things such as public policy, diplomacy, sustainability, the interaction of all of these things together, and overall creating hard skills as well, so that people can go out and start working on some of these issues and start making a difference. Our applications for the fellowship are open now, and they're going to be open from the 1st of July. Our early application deadline is August 15th. So for all of the young folks over here, it doesn't matter what country are you coming from, doesn't matter what work experience are you coming from, check out our website called www.gpods.org. So that's gpods.org. And yeah, take a look at the fellowship. If that's something that interests you, then do apply, and we'll be embarking on a fascinating journey. And now in this second panel, you'll be hearing from a number of our fellows who've been researching on issues related to public policy, diplomacy, sustainability, and today they are going to peer into the future along with you as a follow-up to the previous segment, and to talk about various aspects of climate change, sustainable development from a long-term 2050 perspective. And the idea over here would also be to understand what can we do today, what are the public policy, diplomacy, and sustainability initiatives we can do today in order to be able to impact some of those challenges. With this, I hand it.
The idea behind discussing today's theme is to discuss how we perceive us as humanity, our natural resources, our environment, everything around us, and all of those subsets that fall within this huge paradigm of discussion in 2050, in 30 years from today. And before we move on to this discussion, let me have a couple of housekeeping rules in order. First of all, we'll be taking questions from all of you in attendance, but that would be in the last 20 minutes of our discussion. So until then, we'll have the chat box off. Hopefully, we'll be live on LinkedIn in some time, and you can also watch this on LinkedIn. I have just been told that we've been getting a lot of responses on LinkedIn. If you do have any questions on LinkedIn, you can also post your questions there, and we'll try and take them up as well. Everyone will be put on mute, and the fellows, the GPODS fellows, whom I'm going to be introducing along with the fellowship, as you saw from the introductory video, will unmute themselves as they go ahead with the discussion. Finally, I would like to thank all of our panelists. I'd like to thank Arpit, who moderated the last session. I'd also like to thank the London Climate Action Week for giving us this event. It means a lot to us, and given the time that we were allotted for this event. So thank you to the folks at London Climate Action Week. Now remember that we can approach the theme today, climate policies in 2050, from two separate angles. One can be, and as I've discussed with some of the GPODS fellows as well, one can be that you are in 2050. You're 30 years down the line. What's happening around you? How do you approach it? How are behaviors? How are technologies? How are policies, laws, governance systems? The second way to approach today's talk is if you do change your behaviors, or if you do not change your behaviors, if you do change your policies, your laws, where do we end up? So it makes for a very, very interesting discussion as to scope the challenges, the solutions, the recommendations, the issues, the walls that we'll hit, the glass ceilings we'll have to break as we go ahead on this climate action journey. And how do we make a difference while doing so? So you have already seen in that introductory video, we are very proud of the cohort, the GPODS cohort, the Global Policy, Diplomacy and Sustainability cohort for summer 2021. And one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is the diversity of professional backgrounds, of cultures, of gender, of age that comes with being a part of this cohort. So it is for all of your it is to all of your delight that all of these perspectives will come forth through this panel discussion over the next hour 15 minutes. And that's how we'll take it forward. So how do we structure this talk? One way to have any panel discussion is I throw out open questions and those could be answered by anyone. The second way is that we have back and forth amongst the fellows as they go ahead and debate their ideas. The third way which we have chosen is we'll have introductory remarks of each of the fellows who are our panelists, and then we'll have an open discussion on the issues that we'd like to ideate upon. Why is this important? Because it is important because everyone in our attendance will get a flavor of the various backgrounds and how those apply to climate change. The flavor of various ideations and thought processes that have gone into coming up with solutions to the issues that face us and that will face us for our foreseeable future at least. While we do all of this, we need to understand that the idea behind this panel discussion is awareness, sensitization, but also getting discussions and conversations going. So that is why I implore all of you in attendance to send us your questions on LinkedIn, to send us your questions here when the chat box is open, and connect with us through our website, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. So with that tone of sobriety, I now venture into a tone of energy as we start with this panel discussion. And while doing so, let me again tell you that you need masks when you step out of the house. Karachi and Kolkata are places where it has almost become difficult to be alive. And these are two of one of the most populous cities in the world. The heat is so excruciating that you have to decide your professional and personal activities according to the time of the day, which some of us are already having to do. These are some of the things that are happening around us in 2050. It is now no longer a choice to make certain decisions in favor of environment. It is now a compulsion to do it. It is now no longer an option to look at green finance as the only available technique of finance, a dynamic of finance. It's the only way to go about it. And this is how I would implore all of you to put yourself in your shoes from 30 years later and try and come up with a solution and try and discuss the challenges that we have. So that being said, I'll give the floor to Alif. I think some of you have been introduced in our pre-discussion already, and we're going to delve into a very complicated yet simple, like most of the climate issue subjects, topic of climate justice vis-a-vis land as we move on to Alif. So Alif, over to you.
All right, thank you, Ishan. Hi, everyone. I want to kick off this segment by introducing the idea of land rights. And so Oxfam a few years ago reported an important statistic. They found that more than 50% of the world's land is actually held by indigenous people and other local communities. And although these communities are diverse and dynamic just like us, studies have consistently shown that they live more harmoniously and sustainably with land and the ecosystem around them in comparison to other communities. Indigenous communities, for example, often have traditions and beliefs that greatly value nature. And since many of these communities depend on the environment to survive, living sustainably isn't like just a good thing to do, it's often the most rational thing to do. However, many of these communities don't actually have legal or formal rights over their own land, meaning many governments don't recognize that those lands are actually owned by those communities. So they're at risk of losing their land. This happens for a lot of different reasons, but this lack of land rights that these communities often face means that they're often the first victims of environmental destruction. And this is really unfortunate because research has found that providing these communities with more secure land rights actually by helping them map their lands or recognizing communal property, these things actually help reduce deforestation by dramatic amounts, and that land is less likely to be converted to plantations or factories. So this shows how land rights can serve as a means to combat the climate crisis, But apart from strategy, land rights are also an issue of environmental justice, because unlike us who might feel the climate crisis indirectly through emissions or far away, these communities, it's their forests that are being bulldozed. It's their villages that are being destroyed to build the factories and plantations that supply our shampoos and our iPhones. So I think going to the future, a lot more of the discussion about environmental solutions should look at environmental justice and not just at techno fixes or economic policy solutions, and try to center these people's voices more in how we deal with climate crisis in the future. That's my introductory remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Alif. Also, thank you for keeping it so short. It was exactly 2 minutes by my time, so thank you so much. It's also a very important issue for those of us in attendance, because remember, land is inherently associated with the fiscal policies of a certain nation, of a certain state. It is also a derivative of our economic opportunities and resources. So what does income have to do with all of this? With regard to climate justice, with regard to land, with regard to environmental justice, and some communities suffering more than the others. So to address that, I'll invite Ishita to comment upon the aspects of income and inequity and inequality in terms of climate justice.
Thank you so much, Ashan. So the impact of climate change is not being borne equally amongst the younger generations and the future generations, and the rich and the poor, and almost around all the countries as well. So one of the World Bank studies states that the COVID-19 pandemic has already brought a 10-year setback, in terms of our poverty or income inequality targets towards 2030. So climate justice is that we maintain a duty to act in such a way that the standard of living of the future generations is above a certain threshold. So fast forwarding to 2050, the global temperature has already risen by 1 degree, despite all the countries chasing the net zero targets and decreasing their carbon emissions. We have a lot of missions going into space. We probably have found life on Mars as well, because Earth is not more livable anymore. So this has also coming up with robots and taking up a lot of human activity, which has also led to an increase in income inequality, because further. So then the growth rates are also measured with green GDP. The developed countries have been able to decarbonize like around 30% of their GDP, but the underdeveloped and the developing countries are still facing the wrath of the environment and climate change, more so as compared to the developed countries. The rising sea levels, frequent natural disasters, climate change has actually led to a lot of environmental migration now, and which has pushed a lot of people into poverty due to migration. And technological advancements have not been able to minimize the economic inequalities. So even though there is technological advancement, the economic inequalities are increasing over the years. Right? So in 2050, we still lack global solidarity and collective action to overcome climate crisis. And I would like to end by quoting a human rights activist, Adolfo Prezi, and she says, I quote, "When people aim for a shared human goal, when they aspire to peace and freedom, they unleash extraordinary capabilities." So unity and solidarity is extremely important in combating climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ishita. Again, extremely well practiced, I assume, exactly 2 minutes. And also very important, the way you touched upon so many things, how we blend into the justice aspect of climate crisis. And again, you've touched migration as an issue, income inequality as an issue. And and thank you for painting that picture of a 2050 day where this is how things are turning out to be. Now, at this point, when we were deciding on the structure of the talk, we had the option of going into a bit of a discussion, going from Ishita's talk into other discussions. But I think it is also important to look at what is happening. So where are we? Are our governance systems improving? Are our judiciaries and judicial systems improving around the globe? And I think Pushkar has some insight on this and some light to shed on this. So Pushkar, I'll call upon you to unmute yourself if you can, and then discuss this topic in some detail.
Thanks, Ishan. I'm going to time myself for the next 2 minutes as well, so that I keep my introductions short. So with this, my role is to give you an update on the recent trends of all the cases that have significantly held what is right and what is not right in the past 6 months. So for this, we also need to know if there are only judicial cases, but also if there are any legislations which have come about. First, to start with the cases which have almost blown everyone's mind. So the first two cases which I must discuss is of a Belgian case and a French case. I mean, these two cases, the petitioners or the claimants or the complainants, as we say, asked the court that the governments are not taking enough measures to ensure that they reach net zero by 2050. Now, as most of us know here, that many countries signed the Paris Agreement, but do we know that every country is taking enough measures? So it was these two cases which brought light to this issue. Ultimately, both the courts, both the Belgian and the French court, held that the governments failed to take measures. But strikingly and fortunately, or rather unfortunately, we should also note that the government did not penalize them. Now, this is something very strange. On one hand, you say the government is wrong. At the other hand, you don't penalize them. Anyway, I'll move on to my next case. Next case was about the German case, which in the previous session, Wendy was briefly touching upon, about how youth are knocking the doors of the court in Germany. Now, in this case, it so happened that Germany has a law, by the way, on the Climate Protection Act, also known as KSG. So they said KSG is violative of their basic rights of humanity. The court said, yes, you're wrong. The act in itself is discriminatory and does not provide enough measures to ensure that there is net zero by 2050. However, the court did not give them any sort of direction as to what is to be done. So the court restrained themselves under the bigger principle called doctrine of separation of powers. I don't want to go into the legality of it, but the next case is quite similar to it, which is the most well-known case, the known case of Shell in the Royal Dutch in the Netherlands court. This is the first time that any court in the history of, where we have written, has held that a private corporation is responsible to reduce its carbon emission by 45% by 2030. Now, with this, I'll stop with the cases. It might be boring. But the one thing that I must say, exactly 5 days ago, a group of legal experts and great environmentalists defined the word ecocide. Ecocide is a crime, as an international crime under the Rome Statute. Article 8 in specific says ecocide is an international crime. So with this, I think I must stop and I'll hear for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, PK. Also, thank you for saying that you would not want to get into the legality of it and then just discussing legal decisions and legal systems. But a couple of very important points and something that segues into Karina's point that she will be making right after this, which is, why does the judiciary have to intervene? Do we not have enough laws? Do we not have enough policies about this? What is the paradigm of policy when it comes to climate justice? And on that note, I'll pass it on to Karina if you could just delve a little into this subject specifically.
Thank you, Ishan. Sure. So what I'd like to bring to the table today is to question, when we talk about climate justice, what exactly do we mean by justice? And we could either be talking about the common differentiated responsibilities of nations towards net zero from historic emissions, or the legal recognition of climate migrants. And it's not about one or the other. It's about the plurality and contextuality of all of these definitions. So in this exercise of placing myself in 2050, what I think is we have won certain small battles, but in general, the picture is quite somber. And what have we struggled most with? Has not been exactly creating the technology necessary for carbon sequestration or removing carbon from the life cycle of supply chains, but the scaling of these innovations, leveraging the required financial resources to find the climate to fund the climate proofing of infrastructures in our cities in an equal manner. And I'd like to argue here that our blind spot has been not integrating justice principles into these engineered solutions, replacing one technology for the other without a radical change in our social contract. Because as it is right now, our economic system is unfit to account for these social critical issues. And that process has left the same people who were suffering before the most adverse impacts of climate change, and leaving them even more into vulnerable conditions without access to these new clean energies and access to being really part of this new green economy. So the way we define climate justice and why is it important that we introduce it into every level of the decision-making process is what I want to discuss here. And whether it's at the national policy level, at the urban planning level, or through a set of choices of actions by engineers when designing infrastructure that adds net value to the output and creating a shared knowledge among all of the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. Some very important points made here as well, both in terms of plurality of decisions, but also plurality of choices that need to be made available. And the way you try to redefine justice and question what justice truly is also something that we should learn, because sometimes we are having our own tunneled visions and maybe single dimensions or double dimension visions, and we stick to those. But it is, I think, high time to redefine what justice should be. But one of the very important aspects of justice and inequality when it comes to environmental and climate change impact has been on women, has been on children, has been on the beleaguered communities that have been suffering. It is often said that those communities suffer the first and the worst. So to shed some light on that, I'm giving it to Anshul, who will talk about something similar and on that issue. So Anshul, over to you.
Thanks, Ishan, and also thanks to London Climate Action Week and Envy Poll to give me an opportunity to speak on some crucial climate issues. I'm Anshul, and today I'm going to address the feminist approach to climate justice. Bringing a feminist approach to climate justice here says that women's knowledge can prove to be a key and advantageous source for solving the climate crisis, and why it is necessary to bring together the social, political, and economical dimension with the environment and all of this while we analyze the problem in order to translate visions into actions. So to understand this better, we could take studies that have focused on the impact of natural disasters on women. For example, in an event of natural disaster, women are prone to the risk of death 14 times more than men. The risk of violence and sexual assaults also increases on genders that are not cisgendered men. So to conclude, we need to understand that it grows out of a patriarchal system where unequal impacts of climate change are making it harder to achieve a gender equal world. To combat this in the face of reality, it is necessary to introduce finance plans that are gender responsive and increase financial allocation for gender-based impact. We should add more women in the decision-making process of such issues. For example, provide space for indigenous women. This collective effort and improved discourse is what will bring us one step closer to the solution. Thank you.
Brilliant, Anshul. You covered so much under the umbrella of gender justice and relating it to climate justice as well. And again, it is this inclusive nature that climate action needs to take going forward, because otherwise, we cannot leave anyone behind, and that's a mistake that humans have made in the past, and we're suffering at the hands of it. And now we see that the global north and the global south divide keeps on increasing, something that Ishita foretold about 2050 as well, how this divide keeps on increasing and will keep on increasing. So remember, I think Anshul, as Anshul said, it is not just about one gender or two genders. It is about every person coming together and acknowledging the role that they or he or she or they will play going forward. But since we're talking of inclusivity, it is important to also relate it to one of the most important tools that seem to be available to all of us. This was discussed in the last panel discussion about the importance of climate finance. It was discussed in the form of circular economy. And taking this inclusive circular economy approach is what Khushbu will be doing in her talk. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Ishan. I'm eternally pleased to be here. And the subject of my talk today is about inclusive circular economy, primarily focusing on social justice and environment. So to start off with, what I mean by here is that according to the recent reports by the World Bank, in the OECD countries alone, there are 572 million tons of waste are generated annually, which means by 2050, the global population will also rise to 11 billion people, which also Dr. Gupta has also mentioned. And this means that there will be higher pressure on existing natural sources, and also there would be a huge requirement for the new infrastructure, housing and services. And in such a scenario, I think contrary to the existing economic model that we have, that is linear economy, that is take, make and waste, we need a new alternative model, that is circular economy, which put great emphasis on reuse, repair and recycling items, enhancing responsible production and consumption practices. And ultimately resulting in avoiding resource depletion and wastage as well. And also, but however, I always believe into that when we talk about inclusive circular economy and to make it more gender societal inclusive, it is very important that to address inequalities, which include informal workers, which includes better representation of formal workers, better working conditions, and ethical trade practices as well. Also, it is important to be noted that women are the carriers of actually responsive production and consumption practices because of their traditional given roles and circular behaviors such as repair and reuse. So thus I strongly believe that women can play a major role in mitigating climate change by reducing unnecessary waste and avoiding unsustainable consumption practices. And that is why I believe that a greater participation of women in terms of decision making and economic activities of great importance to bring that much needed change that we are foreseeing in 2050. And also I believe that when we think of circular economy, inclusive circular economy model, we should not just think of reducing the carbon footprint, but also it should be reflecting, I think, social inclusion as well. And that is why we can see in the recent times more and more startups, social change makers are coming up, which are not just addressing the environmental concerns in terms of wastage, but also keeping in mind the health and well-being of the employees and the labor as well. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Khushbu. A holistic approach, I think that's what we take from your talk. And it is all the more important given the discussions we've had in the last panel and some points that have been raised, that if there's lack of inclusivity, you're not just losing out on certain inputs that you would have got in terms of the knowledge capital, in terms of financial capital, resource capital, so on and so forth, but then you're wasting that capital that could have been otherwise usefully put. And to talk about waste and how there is no waste and everything should be included in the way we develop integrated approaches to circular economy, I pass it on to Meghna to comment upon circular economy, waste and circularity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rajen. Hi, everyone. Khushbu spoke about the micro level, circular economy aspect of things, whereas I'm going to be speaking a little bit more about the macro level of things. So I think it's safe to say that with the increasing focus on circular economy, waste management policies of 2050 will be focusing more on resource management rather than waste management itself. One of the most important policy objectives of waste in 2050 will be to obviously reduce the overall quantum of waste generated, and primarily this will be done through responsible design of products. So the aim here would be to extend product lifespan and increase recyclability and recoverability and repairability, as Khushbu had mentioned. So the second thing that these policies will focus upon is to maximize the use of existing resources in the system, because there is a definite need to bring down the incessant extraction and consumption of new natural resources. We cannot afford to keep extracting and using more and more resources. So of course, to meet these policy objectives, producers will play a very important role, not just through design, of course, but through strengthening their reverse logistics systems, because the aim here is to kind of ensure that post-consumer waste is managed effectively wherever it is generated. The second aspect would be to strengthen our recycling infrastructure, which is something producers can do in partnership with the government. So the government support here is something that is crucial. Now, these policy objectives are applicable across various industries, be it FMCG or textile, even for electronic waste or even automobiles. The second aspect of waste management in 2050, I think is, and this is something we haven't started to think about yet, it's waste generated from the renewable energy industry. And renewable energy is definitely the backbone of humanity's decarbonization efforts, but we haven't yet started thinking about how we are going to manage the waste coming from this sector. The reason I bring this up today is because an example of this would be that the International Renewable Energy Agency has projected that by 2050, we will have generated around 78 million tons of solar panel waste. And of course, not managing this would be detrimental to public health and environment undoubtedly, but also missing out on this opportunity would be giving up a big economic opportunity as well. Because if we were to repurpose these raw materials, we would be injecting raw materials worth over 15 billion USD back into the economy by 2050. So I guess waste management policies, according to me, and I look at it optimistically, they would be focusing on resource management, designing out waste from our system, and kind of shifting our focus away from consumption towards conservation. So
thank you so much, Meghna, and thank you for keeping the promise of being optimistic in your talk, because we were looking for volunteers who would have a positive way of looking at things. So thank you for that. But again, I could not agree with Meghna enough about how one of the major missing links in that climate action and climate sustainability puzzles is waste. And the more we talk about it, the better. And from one professional who's currently working in waste, and moving on to Sahiti, who also works in waste management full time, I think. So Sahiti, over to you, and your views on waste and equity generally.
So hi everyone. It's great to be speaking about macro level issues when I'm dealing with the personal and the nitty-gritties of daily life. So again, I'll take the personal approach in our discussion today as well. And I think it'd be safe to say that equity is just basically fair and impartial treatment, whereas we can all safely agree that climate change does not impact everyone fairly or impartially. In my experience of last 3 years, I've seen that it predominantly affects women, both in terms of consumption patterns, like disposal methods at the household levels fall to women. And I've seen that this guilt that comes from this narrative of we have to do something about climate change consumes women more. And at the other end of the spectrum, waste pickers who deal with our waste have to 70% of them are women as well. So I think at the both ends of the spectrum, women are being affected. I think, or I hope by 2050, we can remove some of the burdens and give them money, power, resources, and network to deal with this effectively, which they are more than capable of doing, and empower them in ways that they would like to be empowered. At this point, I would like to talk about a line that I've just read in one of the forewords to one of the books I'm reading. It's that let's not deem to, choose the initiatives that will impact the poor. Let's go and ask them what would impact them best. I think it's much needed for these kind of discussions to take that view as well and take ground level impact into consideration as well. So yeah, professional approach was personal approach in my end.
Thank you so much, Sahiti, and very well put. I think we're all curious about the book that you're reading now.
Bankers of the Poor by Professor Yunus. Yunus Social Business Fund is one of the leading investment funds in India right now.
So I think I'll also request you to post it in the chat box for those of us who want to have a copy at some And thank you again. It's a point that we fail to make enough about how there is wastage in all forms today. And again, I keep saying capital, resource, human resource, financial capital, knowledge capital, so on and so forth. A big chunk, and one of the most worrying chunk of our waste, one fraction of our waste is food waste. And I know that the World Wildlife Fund is working on this tirelessly. I know a bunch of other organizations are also looking at it. And it is now gaining more and more prominence because we're now realizing that maybe our systems, the current systems the way they are, would not suffice for the population that we are looking at going forward. So is there another way to include food systems? Is there a way to look at food systems differently, regenerative or otherwise? Over to you, Zaki.
Thank you, Ishan. Hi, everyone, and thank you all for being here. With an estimated 9.7 billion people by the year 2050, the world will need 50% more food, feed, and biofuel than it did in 2012. Chemical farming, incentivized monocropping, and high input systems have caused soil degradation, water scarcity, deforestation, and immense greenhouse gas emissions. Let's not forget the broken food system that has left the very people that grow our food in extreme poverty, hunger, and depression, leading to 28 farmer suicides a day in 2019 in my home country of India. How we got here is a conversation for another time. How we can turn the problem into the solution is something I wish to begin to untangle today. Unsustainable agricultural practices cause the desertification of land, thereby releasing carbon and water from the soil into the atmosphere. This changes the water cycle, the climate, in turn causing poverty, conflict, and migration. The solution to all these problems involves us working with nature, not against it. Understanding that soil is alive and consciously designing diverse ecosystems that mimic nature. These resilient ecosystems draw down carbon, and this could be what we need to not just reach net zero by 2050, but to sequester our legacy load of carbon from the atmosphere, thereby reversing global warming and providing food abundance for all of man and all the species we share the planet with. I would like to introduce regenerative agriculture through the words of a pioneer in natural farming, Masanobu Fukuoka. I quote, "We must find our way back to true nature. We must set ourselves to the task of revitalizing the earth, regreening the earth, sowing seeds in the desert. That is the path society must follow." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Titli, and thank you for covering such an important topic in such a succinct way and being absolutely on time as well, which I have a soft spot for, as you'll realize as we go through the panel discussion. But a couple of things that you mentioned, and I'm sure we'll bring this up in our discussion later when we have an open discussion, is how food security, the global warming patterns, the sea level rise, all of these are impacts of climate change. And while food is an indirect impact as to how it is happening, a direct impact on our Anthropocene living and on our anthropocentric living, which we'll talk about in some detail later, is also being faced in how human beings are adapting. And the truth of the matter is, adaptation is not possible for a lot of us. So the only option then is to flee, to find another place to live. And this gives a new window of, and I think Yumina would argue that it's an old window, but this gives us a window into a discussion on refugees, on people who have to now migrate because of the climatic conditions that prevail. So over to you, Yumina, with that.
Thank you, Ishan. I'll be agreeing with your point. Yes. So, good evening, everyone. I'm here to draw your attention to the issue of environmental refugees. Environmental refugees are people who are forced to leave their own countries, either temporarily or permanently, because of some environmental disruption, either man-made or by nature, which jeopardizes their existence severely. Over the past 30 years, the number of people living in coastal areas at high risk of rising sea levels has increased from 160 million to 260 million, 90% of whom are from poor developing countries and small island states. For example, in Bangladesh, it is predicted that 17% of the country will be submerged by the rising sea level by 2050, and 20 million people living there will lose their homes. In addition to the direct implications of more frequent and intense disasters and forced movements, climate change is aggravating other drivers of displacement, worsening poverty, food insecurity, water shortages, and access to other natural resources that communities rely on for survival. And with the increasing population of 7.79 billion of the world, climate change is a source of instability and can create massive migration flows, which can be ground of extremism and conflicts. In the past, there have been multiple disasters hitting different countries' economies as well as individual household incomes, leaving communities with limited capacity or government assistance to recover. When combined with political and socio-economic factors, they can push countries into succession of crises and exacerbate instability and pre-existing vulnerabilities. Now, I believe this is one of the most pressing concerns of our time, and something which is not being given the importance it requires and rightly deserves. And now, finally, it is of interest to scientists, policymakers, politicians, and actually special concern among security and intelligence community. And now moving on to international legal framework. As per the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC report, the warnings of climate change in themselves are disastrous and potential causes of forced migration. The three worst consequences of climate change are namely hurricanes, torrential rains and floods, drought and desertification, and rising sea levels. Now, the problem is that the concept of environmental refugees has not been incorporated in any legal discourse concerning refugees. Neither the 1951 Refugee Convention nor the 1961 Protocol UNHCR recognize the concept. From UNICEF to other international conventions such as the 1969 Organization of African Unity, OAU Convention, governing the specific aspects of refugee problems in Africa, and the 1984 Cartagena Declaration on Refugees do not include the ambit of environmental refugees. Now, to bring your attention to the current scenario, there are areas already facing the impact of climate change, especially Tuvalu, Kiribati, Solomon Island, Louisiana, and the United States, who face the threat of flooding as they're just centimeters above water. Now, this is a very interesting bit of argument that UNHCR gives, is that when it comes to comparing political refugees and environmental refugees, they say that environmental refugees have still somewhere a right where they can rely on the protection of the national government. But what it fails to realize is that climate change is not something which can be curtailed by state governments or anything. Climate refugees are only forced to leave their respective lands because their governments cannot manage the given calamity. Now, example to this would be interesting fact that the government of Kiribati bought a piece of land in 2014 in Fiji to serve as a refuge when their country finally disappears under the rising ocean. So that's an interesting concept, but that's just one state among other 280 states across the world. So to conclude with, while climate refugees are not accepted under the international law, it does capture the sense of and vulnerability of populations and the need to act on the behalf of the people affected. UNHCR assessment states that without ambitious climate action and disaster reduction, climate-related disasters could double the number of people, requiring humanitarian assistance to over 200 million each year by 2050. Thank you.
Thank you, Yohina, also for giving us such a well-rounded argument in favor of appreciation, acknowledgement of environmental refugees. It is staggering to notice the kind of numbers that you've mentioned. I think 20 million people only in Bangladesh, and we do not have who will become environmental refugees due to the climate impacts, and not to have any laws or not to recognize them as recipients of protections that usually come with the refugee status. It is extremely interesting, but I actually recently was watching an interview of Cristina Figueres earlier in the week, and she was talking about how the refugee situation will also mean that you need more border security. The borders are more prominent, a lot more financial capital will now be spent on borders and keeping people out instead of the inclusive nature in which we should be handling this. And obviously there are arguments on both sides because there's resource scarcity for the current states in itself, and then to welcome so many people from outside. So these security implications are some that I invite Navroz to comment upon and help us solve going forward.
Thank you, Ishan. It's an absolute honor and privilege to be here. And as I'm exchanging pleasantries, I'll just take a second to share my screen for the presentation that I have.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So as has been mentioned by Ishan, and thank you for the last point that you just made a mention of, I shall be speaking at the intersections of national security and climate change. Well, climate change has complex implications for national security. It is, of course, an existential threat, but at the same time also poses several political, economic, and socio-cultural challenges. In my presentation, I take a capacious view of the term national security, which of course includes hard security aspects, military power, etc., but also geopolitics, but also I shall also deal with the human security aspects of it. One very important aspect which is associated with climate change and the national security implications of that is in fact the structural inequalities that this phenomena shall confront us with. Because not only is it creating newer challenges, but it is also exacerbating existing threats, and the exacerbation of existing threats will have special implications for countries which are right now categorized either as developing or perhaps the least economically developed countries in the globe. My presentation is very quickly going to cover a few of these points. I shall begin with the most obvious, that is associated with climate change, land degradation, and the impact that it has on oceans, and in fact the extent of the domino effect that it has upon food security. Food security and due to climate change, food insecurity is especially a challenge for countries which are already reeling under dire socioeconomic challenges, which includes quite a bit of the global south. And of course, the population is distressed with the poverty being one of the biggest concerns. And studies have in fact proven that water and land insecurity are in fact factors that are very tactically exploited by insurgent and extremist groups in order to pull people towards themselves and to swell their cadres. The second factor is, of course, that of economic disruptions and public health. Well, when I talk about economic disruptions, the most common impact of climate change, which could include storm surges, cyclones, rising sea levels, cause infrastructural disruptions when it comes to economic infrastructure, disruption of supply chains, delivery facilities, energy transmission and distribution, and that has a severe impact on the nation's productivity and economic growth. When I talk about public health, well, that's a given. We're all living through a pandemic, but it is proven that with climate change and increase in global temperatures, there shall be an increase in tropical diseases and zoonotic diseases due to closer human and animal contact. And the impact that a pandemic, or for that matter, public health challenges, what would that mean for national security in its multifarious dimensions, is a lived reality for all of us, and I do not need to go into the details of that. And when we talk about geopolitical tensions, I think I shall be talking about the two major factors. The first one, of course, being the Arctic and the great game that we see in the rush towards the Arctic, which is being seen between China, Russia, and the United States, and what it means for the ecology of these eco-sensitive zones and also for the geopolitics that is emerging out there. At the same time, when you talk about climate change and the impact that it will have on critical military infrastructure, the Fukushima Daiichi disaster in 2011 spelled clearly for the world what these implications could hold, especially for military infrastructure that is located along national coastlines. Coming back to the geopolitical dimension of it, and this is where I relate myself back to the beginning of my presentation when I talked about structural inequalities and what that especially means for the developing and the least economically developed countries, which are then presented with this combined package of land degradation, fragile state capacities, water scarcity, leading to increasing civil strife and conflict, and which also ties to Yuhina's presentation about environmental refugees and rising out migration out of these regions, something that was very clearly seen could also be leading to rising geopolitical tensions. And I shall close my presentation with an example that I draw, and that is of the Syrian civil war. Well, the proximate causes that led to the civil war, which is in fact still continuing, are of course many, but it is believed that the mismanagement of the drought, which the country was immediately in the years preceding the war between 2006 to 2010, and it is believed that this drought was in fact caused by climate change, was also one of the biggest factors that led to stress, especially in the northeastern part of the country, which led to greater out migration from the rural into the urban areas, leading to resource stress and resource scarcity, which in fact led to civil strife and conflict. And eventually the situation tumbled into what we have seen and have been seeing in all this time. I think I shall be resting my case here. I did not choose to paint a scenario of what things might look like in 2050, because I think they're already looking pretty scary in 2021. And if there is one thing that we can agree upon, it is that humanity is certainly headed towards a disaster. I do not mean to be pessimistic, but this is no exaggeration, and I'm simply stating the fact and the truth. And climate change is a multidimensional threat and therefore requires multidimensional solutions, and the time to act is indeed now. It is not a surprise that we are closer to 2050 than in fact we are to 1980, and therefore the time to act is really now. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Navroz, and extremely interesting and extremely, thank you for bringing your expertise, first of all. I'm always amazed by people who delve into international relations, how they're able to connect everything to the core issues of IR. So thank you. But I'd like to take a very important piece of what you mentioned as the thread through which we'll weave future conversations in this panel. And that is the problem of rumination. This is how it is, and this is how we're heading, and this is where we're heading, and the picture looks grim. But what about solutions? And when you are talking of solutions, one of the most prominent things that are thrown at our face it is by far the most prominent thing that is thrown around when we're talking about solutions. And that is clean tech, that is renewable energy, that is climate justice and clean tech. So since we have an in-house expert on clean tech in the form of Anurag, I give the floor to Anurag to comment on this, please.
Great, thank you, Ishan. And thank you, Navroz, as well for painting the picture. The time to act is now. And I want to tell you how exactly a simple concept of decentralization and technology, if applied to our energy infrastructure, could significantly change our trajectory to run away climate change. 24% of direct CO2 emissions come from transportation, and the biggest culprits are road vehicles with 75% share. A clear pathway to decarbonizing transportation is by electrification. And while electric vehicles or EVs are gaining rapid traction globally, especially in affluent neighborhoods, the most commonly cited problem of mass adoption remains the lack of easily accessible and equitably distributed charging infrastructure for EVs. However, the global energy network remains fragile. It was originally built to generate power at coal power plants and natural gas power plants to power our homes one way in the single direction. But we must generate energy from renewable resources, both at massive farms as well as at homes, and power these new needs of electrifying transportation. Coupling these two new need problem with this new generation is a massive design failure waiting to happen at the electricity grids. And this will only get worse because climate events like hurricanes and wildfires make our ability to power infrastructure even worse. The current stakeholders of this industry, electrical utilities, are just using tariff structures to just penalize customers and solve this problem in short term, but this disproportionately impacts low income and lower electricity consuming ratepayers. We need a fundamental reset if we have to move and solve the carbon impact of our energy industry. We have to build local but distribute energy hubs in which we can generate energy locally, store it, and then power back homes and EVs. I have a calculation here. My unit of discretization is 1 unit, which is sized to power 500 homes and 100 EVs. And if we build 250 million of these units all across the world, we'll be able to cut 50 billion metric tons of CO2 every year, which we will be generating in 2050 otherwise if we just keep on the same trajectory. And now I'll pass it back to Ishan.
Thank you so much, Anurag, and so much to learn. In fact, I'll keep the conversation going on this technology and information intersection because Abhinandan is going to talk about the same. So Abhinandan, over to you.
Thanks, Ishan. So I'm going to take an optimistic stance here, and I'm going to take you through a story and paint a story regarding what climate change and industrial revolution 4.0 entails for us. So I'm sharing my screen now. Yeah. So let's hop onto the backs of Industrial Revolution 4.0 and right towards 2050. We start here. So what is Industrial Revolution 4.0 or Industry 4.0? It is a symbiotic relationship between cyber physical systems, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, virtual reality, Internet of Things and big data, which combine together to prove that technology advances humanity and humanity advances technology. Next is what we are currently going through in our lives and in our global multilateral systems. The intergovernmental organizations like the G7 and the United Nations are failing. The Paris Agreement deadlines are coming closer and we are failing there also. And the Sustainable Development Goals right now are still in tatters. So this will lead to a 1.5 degree increase in global temperatures by 2030, a 2-point increase in global temperatures by 2045, and sea level will rise by 0.5 meters by 2050, meaning that all the island nations now are drowned and their population will have to migrate. So this is not only an existential crisis for humanity, but for all the species around the world. But I want to paint an optimistic picture, so let's go further at what we can do. So our agenda is decarbonization, the current industrial system and economic system that runs the world. And the means to do that is Industry 4.0. And the ends that we want to achieve is zero emission industry of the future. That will not only save us carbon, but also save us lives. So how can we do this? This is a transition framework in which you can see on your screens, and we can map. These 5 tenets will accompany us into the future by manufacturing with regards to AI, which is localized manufacturing using efficient 5G technology. Then we have smart logistics, which means that the transportation systems will be more efficient and less carbon. Then we have increasing the storage efficiency of our data on our phones, on our website, on our servers, and making it less carbon intensive and more carbon extensive. Next, we have energy efficiency, like in our electronic devices, in our renewable systems, we need to decrease the carbon intake with these systems take to function as a whole. And finally, this transition will lead us to a zero emission industrial overhaul in the coming decades, probably by 2045 or 2050. So what will be the expected outcomes from the zero emission industrial system turnaround? This turnaround, if we optimistically can achieve within the time frame, will lead to sustainable green industry, energy efficiency of our local electronic devices, and incremental reversals of all the loss of biodiversity and climate change that we have faced since the 1800s. And finally, we can say that we have achieved low carbon footprint with regards to our current footprint while going in 2050. So this is the vision which I have regarding how industry can change our perspective with regards to climate change, and we can have a better equitable planet. I'd like to end with a quote from Helen Keller that optimism is the faith that leads us to achievements. So don't be a pessimist and hope for the best. Thank you. Over to Ishan.
Thank you, Abhinandan, and thank you again. You and Meghna have stuck to your promise of being optimistic in this talk. So thank you so much. Also, a very intelligent way of putting a point across when it comes to Industry 4.0 by explaining the issues, the means, and then the final goal in terms of solutions as well. So thank you for that. Now, one of our GPODS fellows who was supposed to speak today, Snehal, is not feeling well, and I hope, Snehal, if you're watching this, you're feeling better by now, and you do recover in some time. We will skip Snehal then and move to Shrikant. And Shrikant is also exploring the same intersection of tech, but with a lens of climate crisis management. So Shrikant, if I could invite you to...
Yeah. Hi, Ishan. Thanks for this opportunity. Hi, everybody. I'm Shrikant. I come from a background of transportation engineering, and I too take a optimistic stand towards global policy and sustainability in 2050. And it's backed on a solid base of technological advancements. I guess it's too difficult for me to side with human ignorance as compared to the potential which we can achieve through environmentally aware systems. And I understand that we are moving towards a more efficient society in terms of recognizing redundants, and it's now more than ever. With the crisis in terms of pandemic setting in globally, our operating models adapted to tech advancements and a different way of work very rapidly, and that enabled us to identify the number of redundant operations that we all indulge into. And in terms of operations, I'll limit my discussion to transportation field in terms of saying that the number of redundant trips which we all could have avoided had we shifted to a work from home model earlier on. I mean, what was the point of taking up all those flights going over, from one continent to other if we had the tech earlier on? I mean, miles wasted, I guess. So again, on the intent of reducing vehicular carbon emissions, I can affirm on the basis of transportation systems planning community that the focus is shifting towards providing a first mile, last mile connectivity via public transportation systems, and the shifts to e-mobility as well. Yeah, the challenges are high, but the bottom line is that a sector which is exclusively, almost exclusively dependent on a single energy source, which is petroleum, and operating on infra that is, created by trillions of dollars of investment over decades, must change substantially in little more than a generation, if I may put it like that. So ambitious policies, incentives, and investments have to be bring forth, and clean transportation technologies and systems must be put in place without any further delay. So tech is in the background of this all. If it hadn't been for high-speed internet connections, we won't be having a global panel discussion during a pandemic. I mean, just imagining it is a dream. So I'll only portray an image of 2050 wherein we are a tech-enabled, low wastage and highly efficient systems community. Thank you, Ishan. Thank you, Enrico.
Thank you, Shrikant. Again, brilliantly done. All the GPOTS fellows from the past cohorts and the current cohort, if the reunion now cannot happen physically, it's because Shrikant brought to light how impossible it should be to travel to each other's cities. So you have someone to but thank you, Shrikant. Now, there's obviously a lot. And for those of you who know me personally on LinkedIn or otherwise, who watching on LinkedIn or otherwise, you know that I keep coming back to the behavioral and the psychological aspects of making changes. So with that notion in our minds, let's move on to how do we achieve all of this in terms of tech, in terms of economy, in terms of nudges. What are the lifestyle and behavioral changes that we should be looking at, if at all? So with that being said, over to you, Yash. Yash, you're on mute still. You're connecting to audio, now you're connected. Now you'll have to unmute yourself again. No, you're not audible. I'll come back to you, Yash. But the good thing is that someone from our group is carrying the same trail of environmental psychology. And in fact, she comes from an academic, professional degree of psychology. So a very good place to start this discussion. And then we'll come back to Yash again. Hopefully he figures out what the issue is with his audio. So Rachita, environmental psychology, what do we do about it? How do we perceive it and how do we change?
Hi everyone. Before I was thinking I will discuss about this more during our panel discussion. So before I start off with the details, there are some things that I would like to talk about. So firstly, I would like to say that we have come from a history of ancient texts and teachings about health promoting qualities of nature. Be it in the ancient texts like the Sumerian clay tablet describing the Garden of Dilmun as a place where human beings are untouched by illness, or Greek texts like Air, Waters and Places, which stressed about the importance of climate, water quality and scenic environment for health, or the Hindu teachings like Ten, Takten, Bhunchata, meaning take what you need for your sustenance without a sense of enlightenment or entitlement or ownership. Yet we are at a point where we are facing the brutal consequences of our actions. So today I am here representing humanity, not just the community of psychologists. When people think about climate change and its effects on the environment, although all my fellow colleagues have spoken about it in a wider sense, but generally speaking, people limit the definition of environmental change to physical aspects of the planet, be it the rise in the temperature, the melting of the polar ice, or the endangered survival of polar bears, to name a few. But the larger picture of the matter is that everything that we do is coming back to us in the form of poor mental health and well-being, physical illnesses, deteriorated cognitive functioning, or even violence and aggression. Through our discussion, I hope to highlight the interplay between individuals, the built and the natural environment, examine the influence of the environment on human experiences, behavior, well-being, and the influence of individuals on the environment, and the factors influencing environmental behavior and the ways to encourage pro-environmental behaviors. I am here to speak about environmental psychology and how crucial our role is with respect to the environment, climate, built design, and policy. This is especially important in the Indian context, where the role of psychologists have been limited to the academic or the clinical settings.
Thank you, Rachita. In our everyday lives, and probably because of our ignorance, we tend to forget how we're only looking at environmental psychology from this standpoint as to how to get human beings to behave a certain way in having a greener footprint. We tend to forget how psychology impacts human beings as well in terms of how they perceive environment, how these challenges seem either feeble or almost unimportant to some of us. So there's a huge role to play, as I keep saying, of behavioral sciences and climate impact. Thank you for your introductory remarks. Yash, checking if you have fixed your audio. No, you haven't. And for those of you who do not know, Yash had called me yesterday and he was mentioning there's some issue with his laptop. So I just hope that this is not that issue. Yash, you could probably try logging in from your phone if that works, because I don't think the mic is working for us for now. All right, I'll come back to you, Yash. Okay, moving on then. And this is one of the more interesting discussions to be had, something that we carry through in our panel discussion, which I'm just building up for the past 1 hour, by the way, so no pressure. But Santosh, I cede the floor to you to talk about sustainable solutions and net zero. What is this device and beast that we keep talking about all the time? How do these net zero conversations actually pan out in real terms?
All right, Ishan, thanks for the floor. I'll just want to give one situation that since I come from India, the part of India that I come, from, I think most of them can relate to. During my childhood days, we had an overhead water tank. And whenever the water tank is asked to be filled up, so I was always interested to look after whether the water tank is being filled or not. So I used to climb up the floor, look at it, and the moment I realized that it's about to fill up, and I go and warn my mom to turn off the motor that's filling this tank. So she runs to that particular switchboard and turns it off. And I have been trying to understand why does she need to run when there is still somewhat room for her so that the tank can fill. So maybe slowly I started realizing that she must be worried about the energy that's being consumed, or she must be worried about the wastage of the water, or she must be worried about the sentiment that neighbors might carry towards her. Now, if I imagine the Mother Earth in the same situation, we have almost reached to that capacity where Mother Earth cannot hold any more carbon. So we are at 91%. Believe me, guys, now this 91% has almost created a fifth season for us, which is natural disasters that's happening. So now we have set a lot of possibilities for us to make it sustainable or net zero by the time we reach 2050. But I believe the word net zero itself is misleading. So net zero is not something we are trying to decrease the load that Mother Earth is currently bearing. Net zero is just to make our lives easier so that we sustain till 2050. Now what after, so reaching 2050 with net zero is itself a big task. In like, if I have to take an example, currently we are at 91% of the carbon capacity. Now in our efforts to make it net zero by 2050, we have to decrease the consumption of the carbon. But at the same time, remember guys, if you don't grow or if you don't mine, the economies will not survive. So which is in a way putting us into a situation where the life or livelihood. So if I want to just retain it at 90%, 91%, livelihood will not sustain. If I put my efforts in making it net zero to 2050, I have to start using other resources. So which cause the which leads to the existential crisis. So now it means we are still not looking at the sustainable solutions for us to reach to the net zero. So what happens? Okay, for example, if we are reaching to net zero, by the time we'll be at 120% or 130% of the carbon capacity. Then it means it's inevitable that we should look for solutions beyond what is electrical technology, or beyond what is lower consumption of the carbon, or beyond what is all the other solutions that we have been discussing. So it means it calls for a broader thinking that instead of us just trying to bank on the net zero, we should look for a different altogether fundamental economics or fundamental way the country's approach towards its economies or fundamental way the businesses approach towards its profit is, instead of just trading off with the money, every aspect that we do in our life, we should start trading off with the carbon emission.
All right, so we have an advocate for sustainable carbon practices, but not in terms of net zero simply, but also through transacting through carbon credits. And that's been argued in the academia for a very long time, how carbon exchanges and certificates should be the main source of barter going forward. Let me keep the flow of the conversation going, and I hope that Yash has joined us. I'll come back to him after I go to some of our other panelists. And this is a very important point, because solution-based approaches are sometimes winding us down in the sense that, all right, we've decided that net zero is a solution, and then we just start working towards it without realizing what that solution entails. So if that is a solution, that is our goal, what is a certain gap that exists between our national targets and global policies? Are there solution-based approaches that we're not looking at, or are there approaches that do not consider goals the way they should be considered. So that being said, I'm moving to Suchita. Suchita, if you could carry the conversation forward, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ishan. So I'm going to take you back to the time when the nations agreed to ambitiously reduce their emissions so that they can keep the temperature rise by 2 degrees Celsius, and more ambitious target was to keep it by 1.5 degrees Celsius. This was the Paris Agreement in 2015, and how the countries decided to go about it was through setting up nationally determined contributions, some non-legally binding strategies, unlike the Kyoto Protocol. However, that was in 2015. Now, when we see today some recent reports by United Nations, it's observed that the INDCs that have been submitted by the various countries, or the new INDCs or the updated ones, they're not ambitious enough to reach the target of 1.5. Rather, if these targets are going to go like this or being implemented like this, then we could have a temperature rise of 2.6 degrees Celsius by 2100, by the end of the century. And there were some long-term strategies also that the countries were required to submit, which was also very limited according to the recent reports. And for the emissions to drop by 7.6%, which was decided to reach the target of 2 or 1.5 degrees Celsius from 2020 to 2030 is now seen to be not achievable. So what is missing? Why are these countries still not able to determine their targets, their national targets, to meet 1.5 degree scenario? I will give you 3 issues that most of the countries, majority of the authors, majority of the research say that these countries, and especially the developing countries, they are yet not able to integrate these targets into their national policies, the policies that aim for development. When they are not in mainstream, there is no kind of mechanism to monitor them. And if there is no mechanism to monitor where have you reached in terms of your milestones, there is no adaptive management strategies. You cannot go back to your objectives and change it so as to achieve your objective. Second is, these targets, when they were decided, they are in silos. There was no collaborative approaches. So all we need when such targets are decided or when they are integrated or mainstreamed into the developmental policies, they need to have a collaborative approach, not vertical, but also horizontal. So it should be a top-down and bottom-up, a merger of the two. Third issue is the countries, they lack the capacities in terms of the financial resources, the human resources, that is the skill sets, and the technology to make this advancement or to lower down the gap between the international and national climate change policies. Now, how can we do that? As we discussed in the first, as many panelists discussed in the first panel discussion, you need to have a collective collaborative approach. And this also includes not only in your own home country, but also some coalitions between the centers of government, wherein you're just not providing the financial resources, which mostly the mechanism works. The developed nations are financing the developing nations. Not only that, but overcoming the constraints that certain countries face when they determine their national targets and when they mainstream it into their policy making. Now, I can have right now 2 examples, like the International Solar Alliance or the International Partnerships for the Blue Carbon, but still this is very less. We still have to make some progress in terms of these coalitions or collaborative partnerships so that no country face some difficulty or challenges when it comes to reaching the target of 2.2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius. Thank you.
Thank you, Suchita. Very well covered again. Since you have tried to approach the subject from a standpoint of what has been missing, before I go to Anirudh, let me create a foundation for him. He argues in his arguments that will follow that what is missing is an ecocentric approach. and how everything is molded on an anthropocentric approach. Anirudh, over to you to develop this argument further.
Thank you, Ishan. I was probably supposed to be the last speaker, but now I'm the second last speaker. It defeats a little bit of my argument, but I'll say that after listening to everything, I request everyone to take a step back and realize the genus of why are we here today. Let me give you an example. So there were certain chemicals by the name of brominated flame retardants, which is a variety which is now regarded as an organic pollutant, is now found in babies in the US, and the same chemical which is considered as the organic pollutant is found in the sperm whales, which are found deep in the ocean, who survive deep in the ocean and feed deep in the ocean. So we are looking at a world right now wherein the chemicals across the spectrum have reached each and every corner of the world. And who's at fault? Obviously us. But what's the reason behind it is what I'm trying to say is our anthropocentric approach, which we are even carrying today. Anthropocentric approach is something which makes humans stand at the center of the universe and makes them believe in the policy of I. This I makes them believe that the interest of every other party is subjugated to their interest. And this interest of I brings me to my next point, which is of right to environment and right of environment. Right to environment suggests that humans deserve a better environment to live. And at this cost, they go on degrading the nature only till the point where they can survive, which has brought us precisely to where we are today. And let me give you another example of our anthropocentric approach. Why do we see that the NDCs which were made in Paris Agreement, by far, if all of those NDCs are followed till today, let me remind you, according to the IPCC's approach and the recent study, temperature will still rise by 2.9 degrees Celsius to 3.4 degrees Celsius, even if we are doing every bit which is maximum to control the temperature. So who's at fault? It is our approach of considering us in the middle and seeing that only we need to survive, wherein I bring my counter narrative of right of environment, wherein humans are responsible to give a moral hearing to not only the living beings, but also to the non-living beings, wherein we all coexist on this Mother Earth. Let me give you a fine example which is taking place in a world somewhere and introduce you the concept of constitutional environmentalism. And why is it so important? The fact that the countries do not agree to make these laws applicable in their home country, and we expect them to implement at the world stage, is futile because they fail to make themselves accountable in the home countries. They do not implement laws which hold them accountable to respect nature. But one such example is Ecuador, who has not only recognized right of nature, but has also recognized nature to be an entity which should not only be allowed to exist, but also to regenerate. The idea is that at pace wherein we are moving to an environmental degradation, we not only need to stop, but we also need to repair to see where we will be standing today. And for our existence, it's not only important to implement policies wherein not only look at ourselves, but give due heed to all the creatures which live with us to live a sustainable lifestyle. With this, I rest what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Anirudh. I must also apologize to you because the way we structured these talks were in a way that it all comes down to anthropocentric view of things and sustainable solutions, as you had earlier talked about. But given our current situation, given that Yash actually comes from a finance background, a managerial background, and is delving into behavior, I think he could cap off the whole discussion for now with his inputs on what sort of lifestyle changes, behavioral changes would be required going forward.
Thanks, Ishan. And Sorry guys for the audio glitches earlier. But like Ishan mentioned, I feel personally glad to be here, and I feel the topic is it's critical. I mean, now is the time to act as is the theme for the Climate Action Week. And just want to continue from what Ishan said. So like rightly pointed out, I'm going to talk about a little bit about what we can do and looking more towards the solutions part and not discussing the problem so much. So basically what I want to talk about is how behavioral sciences and the theory of nudge, how behaviors can be influenced through specific practices, policies, and approaches can help us to influence the world into a more sustainable future. So looking at 2050, I'm not going to go into more facts which talk about how we're really in a bad position and we really need to pull up our socks. But I just point out one fact which will sort of summarize how important looking at solutions like behavior change, which have worked well in other disciplines, is. So in just 9 months, we as humans, taken as a whole of about 7.7 billion people, consume as many resources as our planet produces in a year. So in just 9 months, this number has been going down for a while now. Earlier it was about 12 months, but now it's about, in 9 months we consume more, and this is across all resources. We sort of consume as much resources as the world is able to give to us in a 12-month period. So that's just to show the kind of situation we're in. What I would like to highlight is there has been a lot of research in the behavioral sciences and nudge theory, and there's a lot of good which has come into it in other disciplines and sectors. But in the space of environment and sustainability, we don't really have, it hasn't really reached a stage where we've been successful at scale. I'd just like to wrap off this discussion with 3 key summaries which the UN Environmental Report recently published talks about, which talks about 3 broad thrusts which can sort of help us become more sustainable. So the first 2 are related. They basically talk about how policymakers and policy processes should involve more aspects of, incorporate more aspects of the behavioral sciences and psychology. And the second is related to this, is basically building up of capacities in the policy spaces and entities in the behavioral sciences and nudge theory. And the last is about it's about implementation. So the last is implementing behavioral sciences and practices which can nudge behavior towards a more sustainable and zero carbon 2050. So yeah, I'd like to talk more about this, but this is that's all for now. Over to you, Ishan.
Thank you, Yash, and thank you for that background score that joined us in the latter part of your talk.
Oh, apologies, that was my timer.
All right, okay. So I'm glad to know that you had a timer. So guys, thank you for approaching this topic from so many different aspects and angles and covering so many things. I know for some of you, these are things that you've thought about, you are concerned about, but are not necessarily within your professional domain. So I truly appreciate that, but that is the kind of impetus that we require going forward when we're dealing with climate action. And some of the major challenges that we have left out, which I want to shed some light on, are challenges of politics, are challenges of changing behaviors, which Yash and Rajita have already spoken of. And in some way, when we're dealing with policy changes, I think those have been touched upon as well. So let me first throw out this question to all of you, and then I'll come to the easier questions, I promise. But politics of the world is such that still fossil fuels are getting the maximum subsidies. That also ushers in the wave of, making coal cleaner instead of energy cleaner. And, so many other examples that you could take from around the world. So how do you address the politics of it? How do you address the governance systems in a way that they become more conscious? Because I think at some level, we'll also have to address how do you get governance structure systems to get more assimilative of what our concerns for the future are. So thoughts on how do we revamp political structures or any changes that might be required going forward? You could either raise your hands or just unmute yourselves and speak. It's a discussion, remember. I see Titli has unmuted herself. First to the buzz.
Yes, Ishan. So coming back to the field of agriculture, I'd like to say that politics is extremely important, and a lot of reasons why we farm the way we farm and we have monocultures is because of politics and policy. And how we can change it, I think, really is a grassroots movement. It all starts with activism. It all starts with awareness, with the people coming together and finding new, better ways so that we can move from the ground up. At least that's the approach I think that's worked. To give you an example, the whole monoculture strategy that has been the norm in the US takes place because the US Department of Agriculture has a scheme called the Commodity Credit Corporation. So what that does is it incentivizes farmers to grow soy, corn, wheat, rice, and thereby feed those crops to cattle in feedlots, which is completely unsustainable. But as a farmer, if I'm getting benefits only by growing these crops, why would I not grow them? The same thing holds true for Punjab in India and why we grow wheat and rice in Punjab. Paddy is not sustainable in Punjab. Our groundwater levels are consistently depleting. They're estimating that by 2025, the aquifer in Punjab will be non-existent. Now, this is again something that is policy-centric because the reason why our farmers grow rice and wheat in Punjab is because of food security and the government saying that this is what we need you to grow. How do they do this? The policies say that they will give farmers free energy for water irrigation if they grow paddy in Punjab. So they're incentivizing a monocropping system. But on the bright side, this is changing. So with the new Biden administration in the US, the same Commodity Credit Corporation has now decided to put in $30 billion from that USDA to incentivize farmers to farm sustainably using sustainable practices. All of this, I think, has happened because of awareness and grassroots activism. And I think we're seeing changes. They're not coming fast enough. We need a lot more change to come into governance and policy. But I think a lot of it, optimistically, again, I'd like to say, is starting with grassroots movements. So that's it from my side. Thanks, Ishan.
All right. Thank you, Titli. Ishita?
Yeah, I think I was also discussing the similar thing with Mr. Reynolds yesterday in the office hour. And he also commented on that it's very typical of politics to think about themselves and politicians to think about themselves. So we were just discussing that if all politicians are also part of it, they are also the climate change facers and even they are going to be affected by all the repercussions of it. And we came down to one point that when common people, are really able to put up their needs and their wants, which align to environment and climate sustainability and sustainable development, then politicians and a lot of political parties will try and shift towards it and align their manifestos or their strategies and policies towards it. So I think that will also kind of bring some kind of accountability in them, that they are responsible because they're also part of it, they're contributors to it, and they are the ones who are actually facing it as well. They are humans fundamentally. So they're also going to be one of the repercussions. So that's what was my point.
Absolutely, certainly, and a very good point. I'm hoping that Navroz will come from an international standpoint because we've had two bottom-up approaches. So Navroz, over to you.
Yes, correctly, Ishan. In fact, this is not as much as a policy intervention, as it is something that I just wanted to also add as a comment perhaps for discussion. And that is when we talk about international negotiations that pertain to climate change, something that's actually been making these negotiations look almost insoluble, is that the whole idea of common but differentiated responsibilities and the whole right to develop and historical responsibilities, wherein there are positions between the North and the South. So this is something that I also wanted to bring up during this discussion, and I would really like to hear some other comments as well on these positions. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Navroz, and thank you opening it up for Rachita. Rachita?
Yeah, so I was actually, when I was reading about environmental psychology, I actually came up with a lot of things which are associated to something that you mentioned. Actually, all of the points that have already been spoken are the conventional routes taken, and they are very important, and they hold true. But there is a different side to human behavior which can also be looked at to solve these issues. And one important thing is that since you mentioned parties, political parties, so research has actually found that people who follow certain political parties or political ideologies tend to get influenced by their ideologies. So for example, if a political party or a leader is not very familiar or educated about these issues, he is going to state his opinions accordingly, and that in itself will influence the ideas about climate, about the adverse effects of it accordingly on the audience as well. So there are various attributions and faulty attributions, certain biases which affect how people view climate change. So I would just like to mention about that. Sorry, my answer is going to be a little long because human mind is so complex.
You do not have to restrict yourself to the 2-minute limit now, Rachita. Okay. That's the advantage of having a regular discussion.
Okay. Okay. So the first issue is, and I think that I also spoke about during my introduction, is the narrowness of the issue of climate change itself. Now we are all educated people, we are experts in different fields, so we are aware how the purview of climate change is so wide. But in the general population, if you ask someone about climate change, he's going to talk about greenhouse effect or global warming. But there are so many more problems. So the first issue that we need to address is expanding the definition and not narrowing it down to just these things. So this, we can take help of media outlets. The more the mainstream media talks about widening the definition, the more the general audience is going to be aware of them. And of course our politicians,
so
especially in the Indian context.
Information dissemination through media and through alternate channels as well.
Yes,
where
yes.
people are more aware of it, and it's not one person influencing everyone with their blinded thoughts of one way. Even though I must correct you, Rachita, I did not mention political parties or ideologies. I just referred to politics.
Okay. The other thing is risk perception. So people have different subjective judgment about the risk of these encountering certain events when it comes to climate change. So like I think it was Alif who mentioned that there are certain communities which are more directly affected by climate change, and they are more sensitive towards how they deal with their surroundings. But this is not the case with people, because there are certain biases. I'm not going to get into technicalities, but there are certain biases which make them feel that okay, this is an out-group and this is an in-group and out-group problem, and it is not us who is going to be affected. It is somewhere out there.
Correct. This is your pot and this is your vegetable, and this is something that you have to do.
Yes, and the other issue is this problem might affect us somewhere down the line in the future, maybe not immediately. And the problem with this is it is affecting us slowly, but just like how the effect of smoking is not immediately seen, similarly the effect of our actions is not immediately seen. So then again, this will affect their cognitions. So lastly, I just want to say that some research has found that
we can probably come back to the research in a bit, Rachita, but points very well made, because I think each of these points connects to something that we can relate to in our lives, and how these behavioral, psychological advancements are what we require to approach this problem from a different way, even though I still think that politics is a different beast altogether, and we require as much innovation in our politics as we require in technology going forward for climate action. Alif, over to you.
Hi, Shan. So I just wanted to diversify the opinions a little bit about politics, because I think I'm more on the spectrum of being very pessimistic about how much movement politically and how much progress we can make in terms of tackling the climate crisis. I think like the way the world is set up and how most systems that we currently live in, I don't think that will make, there won't be like I think environmentalists have been like hoping for this moment in which everybody kind of wakes up and decides to do the right thing to solve the crisis, and I don't think that that moment will ever come. There's a couple of reasons at the top of my head. I think like the middle class globally in each country, I don't think they'll ever be ready to let go of some of their luxuries that is actually needed to overcome the climate crisis. A lot of people have this optimistic hope that we can solve the climate crisis without, lowering our standards of living, and I think that that is a unrealistic expectation, and that will get in the way of a lot of political calculations. And just generally because there's an imbalance between who contributes to the climate crisis, who is impacted, who is going to be benefited or harmed by future climate solutions. I don't think we're going to get to that point in which everybody's like collaboratively working and unified and like kumbaya solving the climate crisis. So TLDR, I just don't think that humans have enough altruism necessary to muster the political capital to overcome the climate crisis. I'm not arguing that we should give up, but I think that this is actually the most realistic scenario, because we've been forecasting about, 2020 is our cutoff time, 2030 is our cutoff time, extinction this. And there's so many thresholds that we have utterly failed, and I think we're just going to pass by 2050 our targets and not meet them. So that was just like kind of doom and gloom from everybody's optimism.
Basically 3.5 hours of discussion, and we're still at the same spot of pessimism. Thank you for rounding up the discussion, Alif. Also, I must confess that I'm a little disappointed that when you said that to expect, despite the technology, we are not, we would not have to change our lifestyle choices, and the standards of lifestyle will probably have to go down for you to effectuate climate action. I was hoping that Anurag or Santosh will come up with an answer and a reply and probably a retort to that. But Anurag has also already given you his appreciation for that comment. So I'll just move on to Yuhina, then Santosh, and then Anurag. And Anurag, that's more of a clarification that I'm demanding from you than your thoughts on the statement.
So there are some certain points that I would agree with Alif, but I'm not as pessimistic as he is. But or anyone else.
I think Alif came out of a Stephen King novel right in that 5-minute frame. It's like everything's gonna be the end of it. Yes, Yuhina, go back to you.
No, I believe there's going to be an end of a lot of things, but I just don't think it's going to be as soon as we expect. Maybe like much later. So the certain points that Rachita and Alif and everyone made about talking about who will be impacted, and there's like certain section of people, and I wanted to talk about the fact that this people who are facing the impact of climate change belongs to a certain sector of community and certain class, which is the socio-economic class, and the effects are not
people who are facing it the most. You mean?
Yeah, people. I believe at this point, someone who is not educated or is not like his socio-economic class is not as well as someone else is suffering more, because you do not have the resources to make a better decision. You're not understanding what is actually happening, because We talked about farming. We talked about the kind of farming we are doing. So someone who's been a farmer throughout their life, suddenly they start having bad crop for 2-3 consecutive years, and they realize it's due to because the water content in the land has like too much salt in it. It's because of rising sea level. So the person who is a farmer and in certain part of the country who's not educated will not be able to come to such finding immediately. He has to depend on other factors like other organization, maybe government, some think tank, some NGO to come up with that kind of fact finding and understand what is the problem.
Also because maybe the priorities are different. That person's priority is not to find climate solutions,
exactly,
but to feed himself or herself maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And he is not even aware. Maybe if that person is somehow aware of what's actually happening, or his living conditions are a little better, that he would be able to like demand answers like from the government, ask for some kind of like remittances and everything. So there's some kind of support from the government. And I mean, the climate change is as much as a global issue as it is a local issue.
Agreed. This is, guys, being said by someone who discussed climate refugees. So please make note, it's a local and global issue. But point taken, Yurina. We'll move to Santosh. I think his arm must be aching now. His hand has been raised for a long time.
Yeah, so I mean, for many of the countries, job creation is the biggest problem. Now, job creation is not happening because there's no technological advancements that's happening. Or if you see, most of the Industry 3.0 is about more innovations and making the production more and more so that the resources are available to many of the people. But in Industry 4.0 is about bringing efficiencies to those innovations. But really the innovations are not happening, which can disrupt the way we are living. So if now, given the fact that there's no creation of the jobs, now if we expect the countries to cut down the utilization of their resources that they are currently using, especially if we take the coal or if we take the fossil fuels, now where do they really bring or add to that wealth? And at the same time, now if we really stop consuming the resources, or we stop mining coal, or we stop using these fossil fuels, where do we really put these workers who are trained and skilled in those sectors? Now that's the biggest problem. First, we need to find a solution for. And it means the transition cannot happen as much fast as we are expecting it to happen, but it needs to be taken very strategically, so that the livelihood isn't lost for many of the people who are dependent on those conventional sectors.
So point well taken, Santosh. I think it's as much about the transition phase as it is about the end goal and the starting phase. So that's well taken. Did you have something else to end? Did I?
Yeah. And the resources that we are trying to look for to achieve the net zero are concentrated only in specific countries. Especially if we take the EV technology that we wanted to build up, right? So the critical minerals required, the consumption of these critical minerals should go up by 18-fold that we are consuming today. And these are all concentrated only in China or in some of the African countries. So now why, like, when the developed countries have their technology ready, they wanted to use it. Now why will China be willing to give their resources to the developed country, putting them behind the developed countries? So it's in the interest of the government and it's in the interest of the self-growth. I mean, the bigger human life is at existential crisis.
Absolutely, and it's a zero-sum game that way.
Yeah.
Anurag, clarification please.
Thank you, Rajen. So the moment I hit +1 for Aleph was when he said that the world is just set up in a way that it's just too difficult for us to just figure this out. Here are my multiple thoughts in no specific order. First thing about carbon credits came into discussion today. When we think about credits, it's just right now as incentives being flowing back, right? But I don't understand how exactly the capitalistic and the monetary world is set up. We assign value to something which nobody knows what it is. The only resource which we have is basically Earth, and we don't put credits to it. It's just like assigning credits, which is just being wasted. Everybody just tries to make money because that's the only thing which matters, right? The discussion started with the point that we are making coal cleaner, not energy cleaner. So, and then again, when we come to policy making, the world is governed by, right now, oil and gas has been the massive Goliath, right, for the last multiple decades. And that's where the power is. Power flows to people who run governments, or like, that's how you choose your government. So that influence, even if we could build good technology like EVs or energy storage, like long back, 20 years back, it was just subdued because the power is held by somebody else. So it's just it's so much work, because we had to completely change the social order. We have to innovate in technology, and then time is running out. I still have a pessimistic view, even if you're working as hard as we can to solve it, because we don't know when world's gonna end. We heard 2026 today by Wendy, right? It's just, and it's the thing is, like, it's not remotely true that it could not happen. We don't know when exactly a runaway event happens. The permafrost, Elon Musk keeps talking about it, right? So the thing is, like, we can't predict our weather like the next like 7 days from now, because it's just very difficult. It's partial differential equations, which we still do not know how to solve properly, and like how exactly it affects. So it's just is the thing is that we have to do, and we must hope for that something climatic just does not come in our way. And so that's the urgency which we need to work with. So that's my defense. Obviously, there's much things which we can do. Hopefully, we have 50 more years until 2050 to figure this out, and we probably do. I hope that answers it, Irfan.
All right, point taken, Anurag, and obviously point very well taken by Alif. There's a bit of mutual admiration happening here. I'll go to Santosh and then Titli, and I also, because we have barely 10 minutes left, so I want to take at least one question from the audience, which I will after you guys have made your comments.
So I just want to add one thing, like, the time is actually not running out. So time is the dimension that's just based on our perception. So actually, if we put a lot of gravity as per Einstein's theory of relativity, the time can be halted. So it's a speed that always remains consistent, but let's put a lot of gravity into it so that we are able to fix this problem by the so
I think you took that literally. I don't think that was meant to be taken literally. I think it's just saying that this has to be done as soon as possible. So point taken. I know that there's a paucity of I think in any case, and that's a very brilliant point. I think Anirudh would also appreciate it in terms of what he was suggesting earlier. But all of this is happening because it is an anthropocentric approach. Earth is not going anywhere, and neither is environment in whatever form it survives later. So if it's on the scale of humanity, that's where the time per se is running out. But I take your point absolutely, and I also appreciate the fact that you care to explain to the audiences that how the system actually works in real life, and it's only the gravity and the speed that are and gravity both metaphorically and literally are at play. Santosh, did you want to say anything?
No, yeah, I just want to emphasize that fact.
Okay, great. Titli?
Yeah, Shan, just in keeping with the pessimism that Anurag and Alif, well, realistically, I think this is,
yes.
Yeah, it was more realistic more than anything. We're waiting for governments, they're doing nothing, and we're hoping for a crisis not to happen, right? But I feel like we're not to put like a lot of weightage on the fact that, I mean, not to take away from responsibility that governments and policymakers have, but we as citizens of the world have an enormous responsibility to make changes to our lives. And I feel like we're just sitting around waiting for something to happen, and it's quite clear that nothing's happening. But we could be making those little changes in our lives every single day. We could be, even if it's just a windowsill, a pot, you could grow like 1% of your food. You could, compost your waste. You could save a seed. All of us eat food. We could save seeds, have community seed banks. There's just so many things we could do as citizens, as communities, to build awareness, to just, I mean, urban farm, we say we don't have the space, but I mean, I just think there's so many possibilities, and we shouldn't take away from what one person can do.
Before you go any further, quickly I'll interject and I'll just grab onto the ray of hope that has come there and run with it. And as I promised, I'll take up at least one audience question. So I'll go to the audience question now. And this kind of relates to a lot of the topics that we have covered. So please feel free to jump in. But so let me get the name of the person right. 1 second. So Tahir Rashid Bhatt is asking, and he is talking about, he's basically asking how would we tap the explosion of global capitalism, which has been created by global consumerism through media, literature, perhaps in some cases the production in the industry itself. Is there any global policy regime to regulate the liberal global capitalism? And again, why this is such a pertinent question is because it ties into climate justice, it ties into behavior, it ties into economy and circular economy and inclusive growth and anthropocentric and sustainable solutions, obviously. So is there a particular regime that we agree with, or are there criticisms to all? Are there some that are better situated than others? Are there some that are more grassroots centric than the others? Any views?
That's the question of the century. How do we topple capitalism? I think the communists would say we need a revolution. I personally don't know. I think that it's incredibly hard because just like the centuries that we've lived in, the modern society has been in capitalism. So that's just my note. I'll let other people who have actual productive solutions talk.
Anirudh?
I'm not sure how effective this answer would be, but the other day while attending a lecture, we were told that there were certain public-spirited investors who collaborated themselves and started investing in companies and became shareholders in those companies. So if you have those 5 or 6 public-spirited individuals who have deep pockets, and if at all they can secure a place in a boardroom, then again those 5 or 6 people can make a real change. So I think that the problem does not, it neither has to be a grassroots movement or it does not have to be a movement which would start from above. It's the people amongst ourselves who are publicly spirited. As Titli said, that there are people, you just need to be aware, you just need to do your bit. A person who has a certain space at his home can grow something, and a person who has deep pockets can make his impact in a certain manner. So I think the most effective thing, because in the end these capitalists are the people who are also responsible for making those policies. So I think it's very difficult to change the perception in that manner. But if the change comes from within, from the people who are making the change, and this is happening. I'm so sorry if I cannot recollect an example, but if you go and read about this, and Ishan might be able to add certain examples as well, this thing is happening, and it's a very good example of bringing change within the corporate, through the corporates, for the general public.
Absolutely, a very big and very important point about transforming. Again, I'll go back to what I mentioned in the first panel discussion, that individual, and I think I am quoting you, Anirudh, when I say that I is for individual interest. I think that's the term you used in your statement. If that individual interest is driven towards the right things, and that comes through awareness, sensitization, education, sometimes crisis as well. And if you're able to inculcate that individual behavior towards sustainability, remember all the corporations through their shareholders, all the governments through their voters, or different forms of governments through different forms of, public opinions are made of those individuals. So if you're able to somehow implicate that, and I've expressed my views on this publicly as well, I do think that the role of the private sector is to make profits. If you're able to inculcate a sense of lowering carbon footprint and being green conscious, that's the line that we need to tread going forward. And that is already happening. If greenwashing is a bad thing, that means that greening is a thing, which is the only optimism that I can offer at this point. Okay, Abhinandan, and then we have Navroz, and then we have Yash, and then we'll have concluding remarks.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add what Anirudh was pointing to. We cannot overthrow the capitalistic system right now, but obviously there are smart people at the power corridors of the world who can subvert it to meet the environmental goals. Like as I was talking about transition to Industry 4.0, so there are capitalist people, capitalistic organizations at the helm of power in USA, in China, in Russia, in India. These people have the power to disrupt sectors altogether. And this power, if they use responsibly, they can impact environment in such a way that what we would have achieved in like 10 years, they can do in 1 year. I like to quote an example, like in the 1800s when there was no steam engine involved in the Industrial Revolution, horse dung used to fill the streets of London. And suddenly a disruption came of steam engine and all the horses were gone. So what the process which would have drenched London into horse dung would have taken 20 years, but in a month or so, the steam engine completely changed everything and no horses were found on the street of London. In the same way, we go from having 5 cars per home to ride-hailing cars in the form of Uber and in the form of Grab, etc. So we can see that individuals who can create disruptions can obviously make a huge difference.
Those are excellent examples, I think, and I have to be honest. I did not think of it in these exact examples terms, but sometimes you need optimism also in the form of technological interventions. And I'll quote the former Chinese president who said that let's hope that our future generations have the wisdom that we do not. When I talk about my future generations, I'm addressing all of you. So I hope that you guys have the wisdom that we did not. Navroz, please go ahead.
I think when the question was pertaining to global governance regimes, that is where I was trying to bring in this point that when we talk about global governance, one has to contend with questions of prescriptions being recommendatory versus binding. And when they are recommendatory, of course, I mean, they can be put forth, but then the question is of compliance. And when they are binding, then one has to contend with deeper questions of sovereignty, of mandate, and of course, discussions in that case are going to be lasting much longer, and because the need is for consensus. And so therefore, I think I'd just like to second almost everything that has been said for individual effort before me. And I don't know, there's one quote that is extremely dear to me, and that's be the change that you wish to see in the world. So if there is the change that, and if we wish to see that change for sustainability, I think a lot of these individual efforts, because, you know, it's that the little grains of sand make the mighty desert. So maybe some of these individual efforts would lead to the change that we all wish to see. So I just wanted to draw this point between governance regimes and individual efforts somewhere. So
even to that, I love the fact that now suddenly all of us have this light of optimism shining within, and let's hope that Yash continues the same light. Once we have the audio and the video fixed, Yash. 1 second. Sorry, that was my bad. I think new entries are unable to read.
Yeah, thanks, Ishan. Yeah, so I am actually more optimistic now, and it is along those lines. Starting off from the first question about how political players versus individuals, can sort of influence climate policy. I feel we as individuals are much more important, taking the trend forward than say a political player in actually creating a sustainable and a net zero 2050. So it all comes back to whenever I'm hearing people talk about how individuals can do this, or certain players can influence corporates and sort of, get them to be more, adapt more sustainable practices. I feel it all comes down to behavior change and change management. And I feel behavioral economics and like in policies which influence behavior can go a long way. So even though there's a lot of research on human behavior, our own understanding of human behavior is improving, and we can see its positive impacts across industries, not so much in sustainability, sadly, but I think the time is right. I mean, next 30 years, we'll see a lot of interesting work, and there's already interesting work happening. So, for example, I feel just a few things that we can do to sort of implement right away is ask our policymakers and governments to have policies for opt-in, or basically where the default option is sustainable. Something like zero-use plastic. So like Kenya actually implemented a plastic ban which sort of had the whole same effect in Kenya as the automobile had in London, where all the horse-drawn carriages were gone, and in just a matter of a few months you had like zero plastic bags almost. So something like that. So yeah, just to summarize the point is, so two approaches. One is to make the default option more sustainable, make that the default option. And second is to make it easier to choose the default option. So for example, on flights, right, it's very hard to choose the vegetarian option because you have to fill in a separate form.
I somehow knew that's the example that you're going to, and how the, yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. So yeah, basically the default option should be a vegetarian option. That's very easy to do, and somebody who wants a non-veg option can just maybe tick a form or press a button. So yeah, and these will have a long-term impact and a cumulative impact, which in economics is which we in economics know will actually lead to a much more large-scale change and lasting change. So yeah, the point is that behavioral economics should influence us and the individuals, and we as individuals have the onus to sort of have much more power, and we shouldn't think that politicians or some bureaucrat sitting somewhere will bring about the change. And yeah, I'm hopeful. I mean, based on what I'm hearing. Yeah.
I'm glad. So if 4 hours of discussion has made Yash hopeful, that bodes well for our audiences as well. All right, last and final comment from Suchita.
Hi. So not so much of a comment, but just wanted a clarification wherein when we say that we are moving towards more sustainable approaches, as you mentioned about plastic, which needs to be banned. Do we also consider?
Sorry, Suchita.
Hello, can you hear me?
Your voice was getting stuck. Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so my question is, when deciding or designing the strategies for, let's say, sustainable approaches or sustainable consumerism, do we also think about the livelihoods that are dependent on producing those unsustainable things that we normally use? Let's say plastic ban. This will impact a lot of people who are engaged in those factories. So these policies need to be integrated enough to also look into the alternative options which are more sustainable and also does not impact the livelihoods of people who are dependent on that.
So that's a point well made, and I think Santosh specifically referred to this point when he was discussing as well, and so did Meghna in a way when she was discussing waste and circularity. How transition is a very important cog in the wheel. Now I know that Meghna is somehow unable to find the hand raise button. So at the cost of embarrassing her, Meghna, please go ahead with your...
Thanks, Ishan. Thank you for that. That's why I private messaged you. But anyway, okay. So, so firstly to answer, I think to kind of answer to Suchita's very valid point, I could draw an analogy with solid waste management in our rural, rural waste management projects. So one thing that we do is that we encourage gram panchayats of villages to ban single-use plastics, but at the same time we engage self-help group women to, start producing cloth bags. So that way you're also bringing in income into the GPs, and you're also keeping environmentally hazardous single-use plastic at bay. That's one thing. And also, going back to the whole individual action bit, I wanted to, and again, I am an optimist here. So I wanted to give examples that are more institutional rather than individual, because I have seen them happen. One is that the European Environmental Agency, and I don't know the details, I just vaguely remember reading something on their website. They are actually pushing for degrowth among European citizens. They've claimed that, we have reached a certain, standard of living. We have attained a certain amount of income in our, our day-to-day lives. And now is the time to start focusing on the quality of life without by decoupling our lives from consumerism. So it's not just individuals here who, of course, I will never underestimate individual action, but I am just bringing out the fact that there are government institutions that are also pushing for positive action like this. And the second example is BMW actually. Through one of our office hours, I believe, or Mr. Christian Rao's session, and it was an answer to Alex's question. He had, you brought out. Remember that you had brought out how it's contradictory to what they're doing. Like they have to push sales to make profits, but at the same time, they're kind of at the risk of being at the wrong side of history because they are pushing these gas guzzling vehicles. So he did bring out the fact that the organization is actually actively also kind of pushing shared economy through the sales of their vehicles. So yes, individual action is certainly important, but I wouldn't say there's any scope of losing hope in terms of institutions and corporates also doing this. So just to end this on a positive note, I wanted to bring this up.
Thank you. Thank you, Meghna. Thank you everyone in attendance. I'm told that we had over 600 individual attendees throughout the session. I am also, first of all, thankful to all the panelists in the first session. So Dr. Gupta, Dr. Rishi, Dr. Schutz, Arpit for moderating it, and Arpit for being stuck in Hyderabad traffic for half an hour and giving me a heart attack thinking that I'll have to manage it all on my own. So thank you, Arpit. Thank you to all the fellows, and thank you for structuring it and bringing life to a discussion that can otherwise be prone to being repetitive or dry. So thank you, Alif, Ishita, PK, Karina, Anshul, Khushbu, Meghna, Sahiti, Titli, Yohina, Navroz, Anurag, Abhinandan, Snehil. I know you weren't here, but I hope that you get well soon. Shrikant, Yash, Rachita, Santosh, Suchita, Anirudh. If it wasn't before because of the amount of time that all of you individually spend thinking about this topic, it wouldn't have been such a success. And thank you for bringing such brilliant ideas from your own perspectives and experiences and expertise. So thank you. Finally, thank you for the brilliant GPOTS team working around the clock and making it all happen. So Aditi, Srishti, Rashi, Aniket, thank you so much. And finally, thank you to all of the people who did attend and who will be attending for posterity, because now this is live now this live session is on our LinkedIn page forever. So I hope you enjoy the session whenever you do watch it. Please do circulate it in your sessions. If you're able to change the opinion of one person, that's success for Endopol, and that's success for me. Since we've had this tug of war between optimism and pessimism, and because I started this whole discussion today about 4 hours back, starting with the Christina Figueres quote, I'd like to end it with her quote. And this is to be seen in light of optimism and pessimism. And sometimes you forget between these two tracks of information of pessimism and optimism, what is the necessity. So she had written that when our kids and our grandkids ask us, why is the climate like this in 2050? Your answer should not be, we did all we could. It should always be, we did all that was necessary. And there's a huge difference between what you should do and what you could do. And let's hope that we're able to make that transition from could to should in the times to come. And GPOTS fellows will keep on doing that, I'm sure. It was a pleasure having you all.